And as you continue to jump in, please just go ahead and keep sending in the roll call. It's fun to see where everybody's calling in from.
Okay. And
Alex in theory. There you go.
Yeah. Can you hear and see me? And are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
All right. So.
Oh wait, I just had a message real quick, Alex, before you jump in. Hey,
Okay.
Aiko wants to do a quick sound check. Can you go ahead?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Alex. Thank you.
Oh, no worry at all. So for those that don't know the Yakima Basin Fish and Wildlife Recovery Board, it was created by county, city governments and the Yakima Nation to promote recovery of at-risk fish and wildlife with a real focus on listed steelhead and bull trout. So when I was hired back in '06, before I even got the job, I remember one of the county commissioners from Benton County pulling me aside and saying, listen, one of the things we really want to see with this board is to look at the whole basin, including the lower Yakima. Fisheries so often is focused on headwater habitats, but every fish has to pass through the lower Yakima twice. And that was in '06. It's been fascinating to see the work that's developed since then, focusing on the lower Yakima. I think of when Marcy came on board, really working on that lower Yakima River assessment back in 2011, that helped queue up a lot of questions. And then it's been great to see the way those questions have, each in their own time, found some time in the limelight, gotten some attention. We'll be talking today about so many things that came out of that assessment. But I did want to actually go back even a little more. I'm a history geek and I'm a visual geek. So I wanted to try and do a visual history of the lower Yakima in a few minutes, just to set the context for how we talk about management of the lower Yakima. So here's my history of the lower Yakima in trapezoids. And for those who are concerned about the hydrological details, this is a very hypothetical June. So let me. You see my first trapezoid. This is pre-irrigation. The top of the trapezoid is Union Gap or Parker, both from a natural and a management point of view, a good break. The bottom is the confluence with the Columbia. And pre-irrigation, we had a lot of water flowing by Parker in the, say, a June snow melt. It pretty much all reached the Columbia with additions from Sadis and Toppenish creeks and shallow groundwater, probably out of the hyporheic interactions in the Wapato Reach floodplain, deep groundwater. But this was the shape of the river pre-development. This was the shape of the river in the early irrigation period. We were building reservoirs, but Clay Island didn't go on till actually after 1930. Only by the end of this period did we have a lot of reservoir capacity. So we still had the same amount of water flowing by Parker, a little less because of upriver irrigations, with the Sadis and Toppenish coming in. But we had massive irrigation withdrawals. And basically, anytime return flow hit the river, it came back out. And for a while, they even managed a wastage gauge at Richland, where they reported disappointedly that there were still 70 CFS left in the river in late July, and that we really had to tighten up to get the river down to zero. You can imagine that meant we lost our summer run fish. We had a massive loss of smolts into the irrigation system and a push of the smolt migration to the earliest part of the smolt window. So this was one shape of the river. Now let's go 1930 to the 80s. We inverted that shape. Suddenly I had storage control. We could catch water up higher. We had a lot more diversion happening up higher. So the river was really managed after the water went out, Sunnyside and Whip, to have sometimes negligible flow at Parker below Sunnyside Dam. But we over time saw, we raised the groundwater table. We sent a ton of groundwater back to the river, more than historically, and we had a lot of water that came back down through the drain network, also carrying with it sediment, pesticides, et cetera. We had a lot of basically untreated sewage outfalls. The river was managed in this period for ag water supply. We had declining water quality, the expansion of bass. We'd already pretty well lost the summer run fish. That takes us to the modern river, the one we're talking about today. We still have irrigation withdrawals, but thanks to Title 12 and other conservation efforts, we don't dry it up below Parker. We do manage an increasing amount of flow, even in tight times. We still have significant subsurface irrigation return flows. And over time, we've seen cleaner and reduced surface irrigation return flows and expect that trend to continue. So we've widened the top of the trapezoid. We've narrowed the bottom a little bit with the more control on return flows. We've overall seen reductions in pollution, the expansion of stargrass. We see the reintroduction of sockeye and summer chinook. And really the heart of why we're here today is to talk about what does multi-purpose management look like. So I don't know if this is helpful to others, but to think about how we went from this to this trapezoid, flipped it over, and now we're making it a little narrower than natural and a little more trapezoidal, but trying to find something that we can work with for multi-purposes in the modern era. And so since the 80s, we've had a lot of work to characterize water quality, whether it was the early NAQUA studies, Ecology, EPA did a ton with this. We've seen a lot of work, Title 12, water acquisitions, pulse flows. We have a lot more flexibility to manage flows than we did 20 years ago, though we still don't have the ability to recreate that original natural flow pattern. We've seen anadromous fish restoration as we've worked so much on upstream headwater and upstream work. We've realized we're not going to get all the way there until we can really understand smolt survival. And that means understanding how flow, infrastructure, water quality, and predation all interact in the lower river. And then on top of that, we've seen the reintroduction, looking promising, of summer chinook and sockeye salmon, those summer runs we lost 100 years ago. And as we do that, it takes us beyond just the smolt migration period to right through July and August, really wanting to understand how flow, climate change, water stargrass, and water quality, including temperature, affect adult migration windows. So we've got new tools, cleaner water, more flow to play with for in-stream values. We've got some real challenges in climate change, and we've got two real puzzles from a fishery side, smolt out migration and that summer run adult migration. And yeah, I just wanted to do this trapezoidal history because hopefully it helps set up some of the thinking about the river, its changes over time, and all the more detailed discussions we're having today. So I'll end there. And yeah, hope that was helpful.
And that sets up nicely then as we move into our first presentation, which is Toby. And so Mark, if you can kick over the controls to Toby, if Toby can turn on his camera. I'll bump you up the list here. He's got the TK for his box. So I will introduce Toby is with USGS, and Toby, you are calling, are you in Whitefish? Where are you at?
Cook, Washington, down in the gorge.
Okay, yep. So, and Toby is going to be talking about the studies that he is doing, working on both the smolt out migration as well as the adult sockeye migration. So do you have the, looks like the controls were sent to you.
All right, are you seeing my introductory slide here?
No, we see your GoToMeeting screen.
All right, let me try this again. Is it showing up now?
Mark, can you give him the controls back? We're seeing your picture, but not.
He should have the controls. He may need to share his screen.
I tried sharing it once and it didn't seem like it showed up here. There we go.
Run it through ours here. There we go. Yep, we can see it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to tell you about a couple studies that we've been working on since 2018. These are collaborative studies with Yakima Nation Fisheries, the Bureau of Reclamation, Yakima Basin Joint Board, WDF&W, National Marine Fisheries, or NOAA Fisheries. These are highly collaborative projects. A lot of people have input in the study design, and so I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the two projects, and I'll wrap up talking a little bit about where we're at with data analyses this year. But there's a lot of exciting developments upstream. Alex did a good job of introducing a lot of the material I'm going to cover on the next two slides. But you know, the Bureau of Reclamation and Washington Department of Ecology are making a major investment in fish passage at Cle Elum. As Alex talked about, you know, there's reintroduction of summer and fall Chinook, coho, sockeye in the basin, lots of habitat projects, more waters in the river now than used to be. And so from a fisheries perspective, there's a lot of exciting developments. But I think many people have recognized that in the lower river, there's some potential challenges, both for juvenile and adult fish. And so I just want to throw a couple pictures in here. Michael Porter will talk next about the lower river and predator populations, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. But you know, there's a lot of smallmouth bass, pike, minnow, channel catfish in the lower river. We know that they eat smolts. We know that they eat out migrants. There's also a substantial avian population, and so this photo is taken from the return pipe at the Chandler Fish Collection Facility. You can see a lot of adult pelicans basically waiting there for smolts to come back out. We're also, I think, learning more and more that pelicans seem to be having an effect on adults that are migrating upstream. When we're tagging sockeye at Prosser, we see some of these injuries on the dorsal side of adult sockeye. I'm fairly confident that those are from pelicans or some kind of avian attack, and I'll show you some more evidence that we've been collecting to actually, I think, document that pelicans are in fact eating adult sockeye in the lower river later in the presentation. A lot of the focus and concern, in addition to these predator populations, centers on high water temperatures and low flows that occur during the summer. So you can see during the summer of 2020, water temperatures in the lower river hovered around 25 degrees. They approached 30 degrees Celsius during some periods. And so from a salmon perspective, juvenile or adult, those high water temperatures are really bad conditions. They just won't survive in those type of conditions. And so our studies are really focused on trying to evaluate how fish are behaving and surviving in the lower river in the face of high water temperatures, low flows, and pretty substantial predator populations. And just to make a point that when these high water temperatures peak, that tend to occur during the latter half of the smolt out migration and during the primary portion when a lot of the adults are returning, specifically sockeye and Chinook salmon. And so these multi-year telemetry studies have been in place since 2018. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this slide other than to say you can see that in each year we're tagging hundreds of yearling Chinook salmon, steelhead, and sub-yearling Chinook salmon. We've also been tagging lamprey, a few predators, and sockeye salmon. And so, you know, somewhere between about 12 and 1,500 fish have been tagged annually since 2018. Just a quick note, we did have to pause our tagging schedule this year during the month of April for COVID, but we were able to resume early in May, and so we still got hundreds of fish out this spring, although we missed the April window. And so this is a slide many of you have probably seen before, but this is you know, showing where our sites for the smolt studies are located in the lower Yakima River. You can see that we're monitoring all of the major diversion dams that are down there, and the yellow stars indicate where we're releasing fish. And so all of our fish are coming from Prosser Dam. We're tagging, and then we're releasing fish upstream of Prosser and up near Yakima. And so we're able to monitor and get reach survivals in between these gates, as well as cumulative survival from release sites down to the mouth of the Yakima. In addition to those river reaches that we're monitoring, we're also started in 2019 doing paired releases at the diversion dams. And so I want to show you how a paired release study design works. This is specific to Prosser Dam. But basically, we can release fish at different locations. You see here we released fish at 4 different locations, R1, R2, R3, and R4. And based on how those fish survive, we can estimate survival between those locations. And so you can see that in 2019 for yearling Chinook salmon, 14% of the fish died going through the head gates of the Prosser Canal, 5% died in the canal, and about 10% died after they entered the collection facility. And so cumulatively, about 74% of the fish that went into the canal survived. So somewhere around a quarter of the yearling Chinook that we tagged and monitored died while they were just in the Prosser Canal. And when you apply that to the percent of fish observed using the canal, you can see anywhere between about 20 and 70% of the population that passed during that year actually used the canal. So it can equate to some fairly substantial mortality just at this one canal. In 2020, we did paired releases at Wapito, Sunnyside, and Prosser, and we're working on those data now. So in the next couple months, we'll have these estimates for those other projects as well. And as Alex indicated, these types of studies are really shedding a lot of light on different sources of mortality in the basin. This is a graph I've showed a few times. Basically for 2018, we have it on the left side of the slide, 2019 on the right side. You can see the river flow in the red and the blue lines. And then these are weekly survival estimates. So these are groups of fish that were released each week during the study. And this is their cumulative survival from the time of release until they arrived at the mouth of the Yakima River. And you can see that both for yearling Chinook and steelhead, survival ranges anywhere from close to 0 to close to 100%, depending on when fish are migrating, what river conditions they experience during that outmigration. The sub-yearling Chinook tend to have much lower survival, and they're outmigrating again during that period when flows are low and temperatures are high. And so, again, we released fish in 2020. We're working to produce these estimates right now. But one thing I wanted to point out that differed in 2020, you can see that in 19 and in 18, flows in the lower river were very low. In mid to late June of 2020, the managers actually were able to implement a flow release. So we got some elevated flows during the month of June. And so you can see that during some periods, flows were as high as about 2,000 CFS. And so we're really excited to see how those sub-yearling fish survived during this period. And we should have that data available here in the next couple weeks. For our adult sockeye study, much of the focus of this study has been in the lower Yakima River at locations known to offer cool water refugia. So you can see the I-82 bridge, Corral Creek, Chandler Outfall, Spring and Snipes Creek. Those are areas where, from past studies, there's actually documented cooler water in the river. We also had sites out in the Columbia, downstream at Kennewick, and up near Priest Rapids Dam, as well as up in the Yakima River to Rosa Dam. The first thing we looked at in 2019, and so these graphs show basically water temperature from early June to late October. The top graph shows when tagged fish left the Yakima River. So these fish were tagged when water temperatures were down around 20 degrees C. As water temperatures climbed up to this 22 to 24 degree range, you can see that all of the tagged fish exited the Yakima River. They turned around and they returned to the Columbia as temperatures increased. Temperatures stayed up in 2019 near about 24 degrees and started receding in early September. And you can see that when the water temperatures got down close to 20 and particularly down around 18, we started seeing tagged sockeye move back into the lower river. So there's pretty strong evidence that water temperature is a driving factor on whether or not sockeye are in the lower river during the summer. I mentioned those cold water refugia sites. We were interested in how much time tagged fish spent near those sites. And so each of these dots is the total elapsed time that a tagged fish spent at these locations. And I think the main thing to take away from this slide is a lot of the fish that were observed down at those sites in this during the study period only spent an hour or two at each of the cold water sites. In other words, they tended to be migrating upstream rather quickly and not sitting at those cold water sites. Although when you look at Chandler outfall, we had some fish that spent, you know, close to a day or over a day in some cases. So there's kind of mixed evidence right now on how valuable those cool water sites are, or how much fish are actually utilizing them. The tags that we're putting in these adult sockeye record water temperatures that the fish are experiencing. And I just want to show you kind of an interesting example here. So this fish was tagged this year here in mid-June. You can see when the tag is in the fish and the fish is upstream of Prosser Dam where water temperatures are about 22. The tag's recording water temperatures of 22. Now this fish was actually, we believe, preyed upon by a pelican upstream of Prosser Dam. You can see this big temperature jump. The temperature is very stable up at about 34 degrees Celsius. We think that's when the tag and fish were inside the pelican. That actually occurred for about 29 hours. The pelican apparently landed near Chandler outfall and deposited the tag or passed the tag at that point, because you can see the tag sitting down at Chandler outfall, not in a fish or a pelican now, because you see these diel temperature fluctuations. And so it recorded that history until we recovered the tag in the second week of July. So we think this is pretty strong evidence that pelicans are preying on at least some adult sockeye in the lower Yakima. Our staff's actually out recovering tags this week. One of the tags from this study was transported down to below John Day Dam on one of the rock islands out there, and so we're going to be recovering that one in the next few days as well. So in summary, I think these multi-year telemetry studies that we're working on in the lower Yakima are providing a lot of insights into factors that affect both the movement and the survival of juvenile adult fish. And this 2020 winter is a big one for us. This is when we plan to do our multi-year analysis for the smolt survival study. So I think we're going to have a lot of information coming forth on what's been learned from 2018 to 2020. But there also seems to be indications that there will be future studies in 21, potentially 22. And so some of the data that comes out and results from this winter will also be used to kind of further design or better design those studies. And so this image will loop. It's a video one of our downloaders took down at Wanawish Dam. You can see an adult sockeye trying to get up over the dam. This was in mid-September. But that's kind of the background on this video. And with that, I'll take any questions you have.
So it looks like we have a question from Sean. Do we have enough data to estimate how significant the predation on adults is? And then the second part of his question is, can we estimate the proportion of run affected?
So yeah, I think we're going to have some pretty good information on that this year, Sean. The receivers are actually still running. I can tell you that we radio tagged 60 sockeye this year, and a handful of those fish have detection histories that are consistent with avian predation. There's some of those results we need to look into depth a little bit more on. We haven't had any radio tagged fish make it back up to Rosa this year. Last year we only had one radio tagged fish make it up to Rosa, so I think there's you know, some questions on how representative those fish are of the bigger run at large, and so we really need to kind of get into the weeds of the data analysis and kind of see how those pieces fall out. But there's I think pretty good data right now to document predation and at least make some guesses as to how significant it could be.
Great. And I think with that, we're going to move on. Michael Porter, you're next. Thank you so much, Toby. And if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to reach out to him. And we are going to move over to Michael Porter. If you're on, can you turn on your camera or audio? Hey,
Yeah,
I see you.
can you see me now?
I can see you. Okay.
Okay, great.
Have-
So I need to go onto my screen share. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen, yes.
Great. Okay. Let's.
So I will introduce while you're putting in presentation. Michael Porter is with Yakima Nation, and so he's going to be talking about some of the lower river electrofishing data resources, as well as some Yakima Delta electrofishing data that he has been compiling. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael. As we start talking about some of these habitat projects and structures and linking some of this fish data, I thought it would be a good idea to share with everyone some compiled data sets that we've been using here at the tribe. And these data sets come from 4 different eras. Well, it goes way back to 57. The 57 data is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Commercial Fisheries. And they did the lower river. They added 74 more miles than we do currently in our smolt survival. We survey 100 miles of the lower river. The second data set we're talking about is 99 to 2001 WFW, where they did 2 sections of the lower river, Benton City and below Washington Dam. And the third one is 2011 to 2013. Look at the delta that was started by Mid-Columbia Fisheries, and they asked the Yakima Nation to go out and look for fish. And the last one will be the current smolt survival study data that we are collecting on fish that Toby just talked about. Okay. There we go. Okay, so this is the 57 paper, and this one it's really a really cool one. You know, it's a whole data set. And it was interesting. It was collected over the course of a year, so they actually started in spring, worked through every season into the next year. And this was mainly done to look at fish distribution and abundance. They want to see what species were in the Yakima River and how their abundance differ from each other. So this was an active count of all species. I'll touch on this a little bit between what the difference is between active counts and summaries. And there weren't many parameters associated with survey events. They did go out and look at flow. They did look at temperature, but they just linked classifications of a low flow, high flow, low flow, high temp, or low temp, high temp to different fish species. So they would say a mountain whitefish would be a low temp, low flow fish. So here's a map of the study areas. This is in kilometers. So and off to the right, you kind of see a description of what they saw. This is a graph for northern pike minnow, and this is an abundance by river mile. So you see a lot of or river kilometers. So you see a lot of northern pike minnow between 25 kilometers, and then you don't see any at 70 or 80. And then as you move upriver above Union Gap, you do see a lot more pike minnow. And with this data, we're always talking about our catch and catch per unit effort. And usually these are done in minutes these days, but I'm gonna show you this data set. You have to be careful with stuff like this. This is actually gathered from the back of their paper. So they included all the data they recorded, and this is smallmouth bass. But you have to really look at what the numbers mean, and these are in hundreds of minutes. So sometimes you have to do some conversions when looking at stuff like this. So the next data set is WDFW. Now this was the 99 to 2001, where they were looking primarily at smallmouth bass. And the smallmouth bass numbers are really good. They actually combined this with a mark recapture study to get population estimates along with relative abundance. So when I say relative abundance, a catch per unit effort estimate is a relative abundance. It is not a population estimate. Now, in this study, they did write down data for other species, but it is subjective and it is not an active count. So when they got done with their surveys and then they got together and said, hey, we think we saw this many coho, or we think we saw this many chiselmouth. Now they did include some parameters with this. They took temps 3 times during their surveys, beginning, middle, and end. And then they do have a turbidity by Secchi disc. And at the bottom are 2 papers that came out of this study for smallmouth bass predation. So the next data set is the Delta data set that Yakima Nation did for Mid-Columbia. And then when we went out and surveyed the Delta, we did find a lot of bass and catfish. And interestingly enough, we were doing predator management at that time. So we were removing these predators at this time. We would go back in, a week later, and this is, it seemed like the predators that we removed were actually made up for by influx of another predator. So we didn't see a lot of change in predator numbers. Maybe that's due to carrying capacity of the Delta. Parameters taken for this data set, we did an active count of all the species, meaning we counted everything we saw at the time we saw it. And we have turbidity by Secchi disc and water temperatures, which were not too accurate because they're done with a small thermometer. But I do believe Benton County does have some water temperatures we can associate with that if we're going to use that in the future. And the last data set I want to talk about is the lower 100 miles of the Yakima River fish data set that we're doing with USGS. And we're covering 6 sections of the river, approximately 50 miles. We collected data in 2018, 2019, and we will do it again in 2020. This is done during the small out migration, or actually during the time of the studies. We usually end a little earlier in June because of water temperatures. Parameters of this study, active count of all the species. While we are looking at predators, we are counting everything. We are getting turbidity from Secchi, and we're also taking water samples for NTUs. We have some DO. We have 2 survey crews and 1 DO meter. Temperatures are taken at the beginning of the survey, but there are also continuous temperature monitors associated with the study in each of these reaches. So here's a map of the current surveys for this next year. It starts below Sunnyside Dam and ends at the mouth of the Yakima. You can see the 6, and one of the areas is really interesting that had never been done before the small out migration study is this area below Prosser. And we put a raft in it at the I-82 bridge and float down to the Chandler Power Plant. This is a bypass reach, and there's a high number of predators in there, surprisingly high, that we did not know about prior to the study. Okay, so we're identifying smolt mortality with the study, and of course, we are seeing a large influx of non-native fish predators when we get high temperatures in the river. We also see a high number of avian predators coming in. We get low flow and low water stage, roosting rocks, and greater access to these fish. And what isn't good is we are seeing a flip during the peak of the small migration that shifts abundance to greater amounts of fish predators. And the bar graph you see here, green represents salmonids, red is predators. So about in May, we see this huge flip in what type of species and their abundance are in this river, and it is predator dominated. So what are we going to do with this data? Just taking a quick look at these years spread across for smallmouth bass, we think about CPUE and how that can be related to fish per minute. And you could maybe go back to just the fisherman standing on the bank with a fishing pole. And so back in the 50s, you'd be maybe less than 0.25 fish per minute, And then you get into the 1990s and 2000s, you're like looking at a 1 fish per minute catch. That's getting better for smallmouth. And now we're getting into the highs of nearly 5 fish per minute. And I'm sure the fishermen will love it, who love smallmouth bass, but it is becoming a real issue down there in the lower river. So here's the Delta. We're going to talk a little bit about the Delta. You can see the bank there with the bridge going out. That is the west side of the Bateman Island Causeway. These are the type of fish we were seeing in there. That bucket is catch with smallmouth. You see the picture on the lower right-hand side with the fish laying there. They're not dead, they are stunned, but that is a corner of the Bateman Island Causeway. You see the stargrass, and it is not a very nice place. So interestingly enough, there were reports of an alligator gar in March this year. We went out with USGS and Toby's crew, and we surveyed for the alligator gar. We did not find it, but it did lead us to take another look at our our data for that Yakima River Delta. And this is the catch down there over the years. And you see, if you look at the top few fish in here, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, carp, pumpkin seed, American shad, and so forth, you go down the list, these are all introduced fish, primarily predators. Let's take another look at this graph. And predator versus salmon highlighted here. In red, we have the predators, and in the green, we have the salmon in the delta. And you can see it's very dominated by these largemouth and smallmouth bass predators. So again, with this data set, we did 3 locations when we started. We wanted to take a look at the differences between the Yakima River flowing water near the delta, the limnic lake-like system of the Yakima River on the west side of the causeway, the Delta West, and the Delta East, which is also limnic. It's a backwatered area, but Columbia River water, which is much cooler. So looking at these 3 areas, interestingly enough, we see on that Columbia River water side of the East Delta, shiner and dace dominate. Well, now these are smaller 1 to 2 inch fish that like the rocks and the colder water. You go over to the West Delta and it's dominated by brown bullhead, smallmouth bass, you have largemouth bass and then they like this warmer lake-like water. And the Yakima River, you don't see a lot of fish, and this is a portrayal of relative abundance. So what does this all mean? Well, let's take another look at this for the seasonal. So when we make Columbia ask us to do this, they also asked us to do seasonal, and I thought this was a really great idea. I have highlighted in here an oval in the red of largemouth and smallmouth bass. And now what I want you to pay attention to as you look left to right over the seasons is that these are represented across all seasons, meaning they are always there. Now, these bars are split into red and blue, red signifying juvenile, blue signifying adult. And what we see here is high numbers of juveniles in this area all the time. And if you look across at the other fish species, they aren't using this area. You know, many of the resident native species do not use this area across every season. So what can we do? How can we analyze this data? And when we're looking at the 3 different locations, we can throw a non-metric multi-dimensional scaling plot to just kind of look at the community structures. And here we see they're pretty highly similar. When you look at this plot, you're looking for fish that are way off the side. Well, you see to the very right, we saw walleye and sockeye, but we only saw those in the Yakima River. So this is what that plot is telling you. The rest is everything is very close together. So it's a highly similar, and we would expect that for such close connected areas to have similar species. Well, this green table up there on the right top of this is a Simpson index, and we're using this index to gauge differences in populations here. And what we see is the West Delta and the East Delta are fairly similar. 49% of the time, these community structures and the abundance of these structures is fairly similar. But if you take a look at the East Delta and the Yakima River, they're not very as similar. They're only similar by about 75% in terms of the abundances of these fish. And if you look at the West Delta, that's 33%. So what we're seeing is, yes, this area, these non-flowing areas are having very different population than this flowing river system. So what do we do now with this fish data? And we want to talk about water quality of the lower river. What are the next steps? Of course, fish health. Fish health is number 1. Fish need clean water. Fish health is essential. It relates to human health. Clean water is everything for us. So what kind of parameters do we need to keep recording? I know we're talking about this in the future in DO, temp, pH, flows. These are all very important to fish. So what can we do with this data? We can model fish use with temperature. Right now we're creating a model to forward predict community structures and changes of these fish populations. We would like to combine this model with the current efforts of the Department of a Washington State Department of Ecology on a temperature model, and we would like to predict fish presence absence as climate changes and as they can move up the river. And then that's what's really nice about having a data set with the smolt survival study where it has a river distance. And the other questions are continuing studies. What data do we need for upcoming projects? And this is really going to be a multiple agency coordination for combining fish data with habitat projects. And I'm just going to leave you with this last slide, a picture of the Delta this year, and this was taken by our crew and Christy Finder. And this is what's going on in the Delta. This is really bad. This is a real change from 10 years ago when I first started. And I really think this is something that really needs to, be addressed as we look forward to climate change and some of the implications there. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Michael. We're gonna, if anybody has questions, we're gonna record them, and if we have time, we will move into the next one, but I think we'll keep going. So that's a great segue as we jump into the next project, which gets into, at the end, discussing the Yakima Delta. So with that, I am going to actually kick over controls to me.
Marcy, you should be the presenter. You just need to share your screen, I think.
Yep, I'm getting it. So Rebecca Wassel and I pulled together a presentation a few years ago for the Yakima Basin Science and Management Conference, and we wanted to kind of give an updated of where we're at now. It's a higher level overview of the monitoring work and projects that are in development to support cool water refuge in the lower Yakima River. So as we talk about the lower Yakima River, a reminder that we're talking about the river from below Union Gap all the way down to the confluence of the Columbia River in Richland. It's roughly 107 miles of river out of 215 main stem river miles, so just about half the length of the main stem.
Hey, Marcy, so we're seeing your presenter view, which is totally fine, except it's like giving away your secrets of what's coming as the next slide.
How weird is that? How do I get it to get out of presenter view?
Are you on two screens?
I am, of course, on two screens. Let me, I can always shut off one screen. That's weird because I've done this several times.
There's a button that says swap displays. I think you can just do that.
Okay.
The top of your
we'll just do it this
view.
way.
Now we've lost any screen.
No, you've completely lost it. Yeah, Mark is going to have to kick back presenter mode to me here. Or I can take it.
You should still have it. There you go.
Perfect.
Let's see, Mark. Works better when I take it. Okay, so let's see. So we're gonna, if everyone's got where we're at now, get a confirmation we're good. So we're gonna go through, just kind of a discussion of past work, what we know, and then some about our monitoring and where we're at, and then projects, what we're doing and where we're moving from here. So there has been quite a bit of work done with Cool Water Refuge, and Toby is, adding to that body of knowledge, as he had mentioned, in our actual Yakima River. And, there's a study from Kiefer and others that found that salmon do take advantage of cool water areas in main stem rivers and cooler incoming tributaries as they travel to their spawning grounds. And this is in order to help them alleviate their thermal stress. And Specifically to the Yakima River, Berman and Quinn emphasized the need to focus on cool water refuge in addition to restoration of spawning and rearing grounds for long-term survival. And the picture there in the corner is from J. Ebersol, where there's a really small amount of cool water, going from 26 degrees C to 15 C, and the little black dots are where the fish are moving to utilize that cooler water. So, this kind of lends us, by focusing on cool water refuge, we can start shifting the paradigm from looking at the main stem bulk temperatures to understanding the variable temperature heterogeneity that exists in our lower Yakima River. And so if we identify multiple cool water locations, then we can kind of cobble together this idea of, akin to a salmon hopscotch, where we can create cool water refuges that they can then utilize as they move upstream to their spawning and rearing habitats. So moving in from, what we know about cool water refuge, how does that apply to our Yakima River? We are amassing a very large database of scientific knowledge on temperature variability in the Yakima River. And, by pulling together all of this data and resources, it allows us to help, determine what are the hot points for cool water refuge that we want to target and focus, and how do we better use that in our river management tools. So I'm going to give a shout out to some of the work that's going on currently. As many of you know that have been kind of working with me in the last 10 years, we have done a lot of work on thermal profiling. And for those that aren't familiar, thermal profiling is just when we float down the river in our boats, canoes, kayaks, and we drag temperature probes behind us that record data every 3 seconds. And then that data is referenced to GPS data. And so it gives us this snapshot in time of coordinated temperature data along with GPS coordinates. And Andrew Gandasek with USGS right now is taking all of the thermal profiling data that has been done from 2001 to 2018. There were several floats that were done in the early 2000s by John Vaccaro, and then Benton Conservation District floated the lowest part of the river in 2008, 2009. And then we refloated with our partners, Yakima Nation Department of Ecology, USGS, in 2018. So he is taking all of this data and identifying, the variability between the sets and looking at changes in river morphology and basin groundwater, surface water interactions. And so that USGS scientific investigations report with that analysis will be out later this winter. So I just wanted to let you know that is on the horizon. So we also recently obtained funding through the Subhabitat Committee Integrated Plan through Department of Ecology. And in 1997, there was some forward-looking infrared flights that were performed by the Bureau of Reclamation, or commissioned by the Bureau of Reclamation. And so they flew the whole river when the technology was, somewhat new, and gave us kind of the snapshot of cool water refuge and variability within the lower river. So we had funding to redo those flights. So those were just conducted. We contracted with Quantum Spatial Inc., and they flew the river in the first week of August when the thermal contrasts are greatest between the main stem and the cool water. And so they covered 108 river miles, and you can see the yellow is their area of pathway, and they have a half meter spatial acquisition with 0.5 degrees centigrade thermal resolution. So they are currently still analyzing this data, but I want to show you just a couple of the images that are coming out, and the full report is due end of November, I think early December, that we will have that available as well. And so, you can see the dark, pretty purple color that's dumping into our main stem river, Sadis Creek, Sulphur Creek, and how quickly that cool water attenuates when it hits the main stem. Moving downstream, we have similar images for Corral Creek and Spring and Snipes. And Spring and Snipes, we see the darker orange compared to the lighter yellow is kind of that cool water. It has a little bit longer extent as it's mixing with the Yakima main stem. And I thought this one was interesting in their initial analysis. The picture on the right is our float data, our thermal profile data from 2018, and then the recent TIR images on the left. And so, it's great to have these multiple tools as we can see, a place that we weren't able to kind of hit with our boats, we pick up that cool water that's coming in on the TIR imaging. So in addition to the snapshots in time of thermal profiling and looking at TIR images, we are also implementing a bunch of continuous monitoring at several identified cool water refuge sites. And so this allows for investigation of the seasonal and the temporal variability within the sites. Rich Shively, who's going to be talking under the water quality monitoring portion, has been looking at cool water refuge sites in the lowest part of the river, and he'll just talk about some general specifics that he's finding there. And that was done as part of a first phase 1 grant through the integrated plan. We have a second phase that just gave us money to move upstream, and so we identified 5 additional sites that we are monitoring. Those loggers were deployed by our BCD FCD team as well as Tom at the Yakima Nation this last July. And we just downloaded that data in the last couple weeks. So those sites are identified as a couple of them above Zilla, which is river mile 93, 92, and then we have the river mile 85 and 80. 80 is close to Horse Heaven Hills Ranch, where Merritt formerly lived, if this helps you guys orient, and then river mile 61 is Sulphur Drain. As I said, the data is fresh. We just got it last week, so we haven't worked it up. But just to give you a little teaser of, some of this cool water monitoring, this is River Mile 92 complex, and the gray trace corresponds to the logger that's the farthest west here on the side channel. And we are seeing temperatures in from that logger that are, this is July 4th, and we're seeing 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And, it never really gets above 60 Fahrenheit as compared to the downstream loggers, which are much warmer. So as we move from, gathering our data, looking at these sites, our ultimate goal is moving it into project development. And we currently right now have a couple of locations that are under conceptual design, and these are River Mile 4.9 and River Mile 2.5. They have identified persistent cool water inputs. To help you orient, these sites are some of the lowest on the river besides Yakima Delta. River Mile 4.9 is a side channel that runs under the I-182 bridge over the Yakima River that connects Richland. And River Mile 2.5 is better known as Eamon Creek Wasteway. And I pulled the LiDAR data because it's hard to see Eamon Creek Wasteway with all the vegetation, but you can see the half of the channel here to the opening. Both of these sites are part of the Yakima Delta Habitat Management Unit, Lake Wallula, so they are on Army Corps property. I-182, as mentioned, is this long side channel. And then up here, there is a pond that is fed by groundwater. The pond was built by the Washington State Department of Transportation to collect runoff groundwater and help with bridge footing stabilizations. So the water collects, and then it goes over kind of a man-made weir rock waterfall into the side channel. And then the temperature, or the flow actually at base flow bifurcates, where the cool water flows downstream like you would expect, but it also flows upstream to the top of the island. And so Rich Shively with USGS has been monitoring the site for the last 2 years and collecting data. So in order to make it amenable to adult fish during summer migration, we are going to have to figure out a way to make the site more accessible. So some of our design goals are to enhance the cool water refuge at base flow by adding depth and holding capacity and access for adult migrants, and also finding ways to make sure that we are preventing some of the mixing so that we can maintain that cool water refuge and it's not just lost to the main stem. Similarly, at the mouth of Eamon Creek Wasteway, this one has a more natural opening. It's got decent flows, but in terms of habitat, it is, you know, a lot of fine silts and sediments. The temperatures are quickly lost to the main stem, but we do have evidence that this site is already utilized in some capacity by adult sockeye as they're moving up. So this is data from June of 2016, where Dan Degger was down at the site taking temperature readings and had seen sockeye that were holding and making use of that slightly cool water. So, and then just to springboard off into the Yakima Delta, Merritt had provided me a couple of updates that I'll just pass along to you. So this is our most recent TIR imaging of the Yakima Delta compared to the 1997 data, and you can see the difference in technology, but what isn't different is the fact that it's still really hot. And as many of you are aware, you know, this project, Mid-Columbia Fisheries contracted with Northwest Hydraulic Consultants back in 2014 and had just looked at what would happen if we removed the causeway that was blocking the flow between the Yakima and Columbia River in terms of changing those thermal dynamics in the Delta. So I'm not going to get into too much, but if you have questions about the current project, it is now part of a Section 1135 with the Army Corps of Engineers, and Merrick Mitchell-Wajee with Mid-Columbia Fisheries and Mike Ritter with Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife are project coordinators on it. And so they are working with the Army Corps of Engineers as well as the public and partners on this project and the development. And so if you have further questions, please do reach out to them. And so in summary, enhancement, how do we know it when we see it when we're looking at cool water refuge? Well, we're looking for those key ideas of, does it improve access? You know, can we improve access? Can we increase the influence of the cool water refuge? Can we increase the persistence of that cool water? And does it contribute to the cumulative impact of our fish that are migrating upstream? And with that, I'm going to kick it over to funding and questions.
I really like the title of the Delta slide, Marcy. That was cute. Still hot.
It's not changed much. And so we switched the order of our talk, so we are segueing next into Becca, who is going to talk about one of the pilot projects that we have actually done on the lower Yakima River to develop cool water refuge at River Mile 25. So I'll let Mark hand off controls.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. Are you hearing me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Well, this is just an update on what we've learned so far this summer in the first full year after implementation of what we're considering to be a thermal refuge pilot project in the lower river. So as you'll recall, north of Benton City, there's a disconnected oxbow on property owned by Bill Mast. And with the help of several different funding sources and Benton Conservation District, we've implemented a project that is trying to get at those key elements of improving or enhancing thermal refuge. So trying to increase the influence, increase the persistence, and increase the cumulative impact. In the floats that Marcy had done in 2009, this section of the river shows up with a little bit of a cooling effect, but we weren't able to pick up the cooling effect that we'd like to see from this disconnected oxbow feature. As we began work, we identified some real specific goals here, and they actually changed over the course of working with a local technical committee. So at one point, we thought we might look at enhancing habitat in an existing flowing side channel, and we at one point thought we might look at trying to get fish into the disconnected oxbow. But after working back and forth with local stakeholders, we ended up focusing on how we can really look at the temperature influence of that oxbow and then provide habitat for adults and juveniles in the main stem river that's improved because of the influence of the oxbow. So the area in question is located in this part of the river that looks confusing to me because it looks like it's flowing backwards, but that's just because I have a funny perspective on maps. But we're north of Benton City, and we have this 1,900-foot disconnected oxbow that had an agricultural road and culvert at this location with a lower blue star, and then a second agricultural road and very small culvert right here before the river. So the oxbow was only connected to the river when the river was very high. It was mostly connected through backwatering. By midsummer, we saw almost complete disconnection of the oxbow at the downstream end, and the upstream end of the oxbow had been disconnected at least since the floods in 1996. With support from Department of Ecology, Benton Conservation District monitored temperatures in that oxbow at those two locations and found that at that first agricultural road, the groundwater influence was strong enough to keep winter temperatures, so we're looking at this gray line for the oxbow temperature, significantly warmer than the winter temperatures experienced in the river, and summer temperatures, again the gray line, in the oxbow held at 60 degrees Fahrenheit when the main stem river was experiencing temperatures up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So we thought it was really compelling to look at ways that we could help that groundwater influenced water from the oxbow make its way and connect to the river. So the existing outlet prior to construction was this 24-inch diameter culvert that was perched and not typically connected to the river. Last July, we had constructed an alcove that looked a little messy at that point, but was already beginning to collect cool water. We followed that up with extensive planting along the oxbow channel, and we also created a more defined channel by clearing out some of the aquatic vegetation that was growing there to try and really concentrate the cool water and help it make its way to the river. We started our temperature monitoring here, and by we, I mean Benton Conservation District's technicians. Thanks, guys. In July, we were delayed a bit because of the difficulties with field work last spring, but they were able in July to install a temperature logger here, which was side channel 1, that was just below that old agricultural road. In the middle of the new excavated pilot channel through the oxbow. Here at side channel 3, which is just above the downstream agricultural road and culvert. Here in the alcove, and then here in the main stem river. And just as a reminder, things are a little bit green and a little bit muddy in July in the lower river. So field work there is not that easy, and I really appreciate everyone's help. Okay, so here's for the big reveal. Are you guys ready? I kind of want to do a drum roll, but I'll be more professional than that. We were really thrilled with these preliminary results of the temperature monitoring this summer. So the orange line that shows up as warmer throughout July to present was the main stem river monitor, MS1. This blue line is the newly constructed alcove. So we're seeing that the cool groundwater influence is making its way down to the alcove and is creating a pocket of water that is greater than 2 degrees Celsius cooler than the water temperatures that are experienced in the river. We also saw that in the groundwater channel, monitoring locations that are labeled side channel, we were seeing an even stronger influence from groundwater temperatures, and we're maintaining an expanse of cool water that then could make its way to the river. Part of the management for this year was that the landowner was using his irrigation water to help to support the new riparian plantings along the pilot channel. So he was putting irrigation water in upstream here above the higher agricultural road, letting it pool here and then seep through the crossing into the groundwater channel. So that irrigation water was operating from April 15th to about October 14th, and contributed to the nice flow that we saw going through the channel into the alcove. He also kept these gates pretty much closed, both at this upstream and this second location. So the water was pooling and seeping, and then pooling and seeping. And that seems to have been an effective way to get that nice cool water out to the alcove. This is how the groundwater channel itself was looking in October. Over here on the right side of our screen, we see the new plants establishing. Mid-Columbia Fisheries technicians assisted Wildlands Incorporated in doing weed control, some watering, and lots of beaver protection. We had, there's a very active beaver in there who has some of his own management ideas, most of which I think are probably positive for cool water. So now that we have some evidence to suggest that the water temperatures are tracking the way we hoped they would, we want to get a good idea of how fish might be able to use this. So our intent is to install a pit tag array here at the mouth of the alcove on the river, and then a second right here above the culvert at the downstream end of the side channel. So we'll have the culvert opened enough to allow juvenile access, probably not adults, and be able to see if we're having fish move into the alcove and if any of them are moving up to get access to this groundwater influenced area upstream of the culvert. And we expect to have those installed in December. But we really appreciate everybody's help and suggestions and funding as we've moved forward with this project, which has felt like it's really heavy on the adaptive management. Things are changing in response to the data we get. So thank you for your support so far, and please let me know of your thoughts and ideas. I think Marcy is saying if you have questions, pass in my direction.
Yep, I am now off of mute. Thank you, Becca.
Sean, yeah, I do. The depth in the alcove is sufficient to support adult sockeye holding, I believe. I can give you the measurements for that, but that was the design criteria.
Okay. Thank you, Becca. And with that, we are going to pass it on to Bridger Cohen, who's with Yakima Nation. Bridger, are you there? I see you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'll let you take it off. Take it on.
All right. Can people see the little GoToMeeting sort of gadgets on the side of my screen, or is it just the PowerPoint?
It's just the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, my name is Bridger Cohen, and I just started here at Yakima Nation Wildlife about a year ago, and I'm currently in the position, or close to the position that Tom Elliott used to have here. So many of you are probably know him, and I'm doing similar work with the wetlands program. So this is just a quick update on some projects that we have going on in the Wapato Reach. These are somewhat similar to the project that Rebecca was just talking about. We have two on-the-ground habitat projects, the Sadis North Drain and a side channel restoration of River Mammal A9.5. And then we also have a little report on an assessment we did with Natural Systems Design of the status of the riparian cottonwood forest in the Reach, and some thoughts about future projects regarding that. Oops. There we go. So here are those first two projects, and these are located around Toppenish and Granger. Both of them are really focused on just getting water into places that have historically held water and been nice wetland systems that are degraded in various ways. So upstream, the 89.5 project, there's a very large section of side channel, about 4 miles, that currently only receives water in really high floods. So this spring, actually, when we had a high water event in February, Tom and I went out there, and it was great to see what the channel would look like in a flood year. It was watered up. There were lots and lots of ducks, just really nice habitat. But that only happens when you get quite high water events. And so this project is going to aim to lower that inundation interval. And then in the Satis area, the Satis wildlife area that Yakima Nation has, there's a series of wetlands there that provide really good habitat, but we've had issues getting water into those wetlands. And this project would take water from an agricultural drain system that currently just flows directly into Satis Creek and then move it into the Satis wildlife area to help water those wetlands up. And there's also some infrastructure improvements that are going to be part of that. So for that North Drain project, it really is just taking water from the North Drain and moving into the wetland area. A lot of the infrastructure there is quite old and it's starting to leak and just fall into disrepair. And so there's pretty active management at that wildlife area, and we're not able to do that as well as we would like. It's really hard to fill up the wetlands in the fall for hunting season and for wildlife migration, for waterfowl migration. And it's also hard in the summer. We typically drain them so we can do some work on invasive species, invasive plant species there, and that's also difficult. And a third benefit to this project that may be of interest to folks on this call is, in addition to restoring the wetlands, we're actually taking water from the North Drain that would be flowing into the creek and then into the Yakima River, and hopefully taking a lot of the sediment, nutrient, and other pollutants out of that water. And ideally, it's going to go into the water table and then percolate back into the Yakima main stem, and maybe at a cooler temperature, although that's a little up in the air. So here's the project map for that. You can see on the left side, there's the Satis North Drain. Currently just flows right in, and where it turns the corner there and flows down towards Satis Creek, that's where our inlet structure is going to be. And then the proposed flow paths are just following current agricultural ditches that aren't really used much, and it flows right into the wildlife refuge here. And then all of these purple structures are they're existing water control structures, but they're going to be replaced or upgraded as part of this. And there's some potential alternatives we're considering too, as far as additional wetlands habitat improvement. So there's not a lot of totally new construction here, and it's not really a restoration project in the sense of returning it to some historic state. We're just trying to manage it better, because right now it's not really possible to return it to what it would have looked like pre-dam construction and pre-hydro-regulation of the river. But hopefully we'll be able to improve the waterfowl habitat there quite a bit and also provide some benefits for fish. Current status on that is that we're into the permitting phase and collaborating with Ducks Unlimited on doing some work related to that, trying to map the wetlands. We're working with the EPA, which we have worked with before, and then also the Army Corps of Engineers, which the Yakima Nation has not really worked with much in the past. So that's a learning experience, but it's a good one. And hopefully get this project on the ground starting next summer. And we'll do it in 2 phases. So the in-wetland work, clearing out channels and replacing those water control structures would be in the summer when the water is low in the ponds and we're not having a lot of waterfowl there. And then after the irrigation season wraps up and the water in the North Drain's low, we'll work on that second phase at the inlet. Next project is the River Mile 89.5 project, up by just below the Toppenish-Zilla Bridge. And this is another phase, another project with 2 phases. The first phase is actually complete already. You can see on the right side, there's a picture. It's a little hard to tell what's going on with this one, but this is one of the inlet structures that was completed last fall. And these are just really big log structures that divert water from, in this case, the side channel, and then there's another one on the main stem into the beginnings of the side channel that we're going to clear out for phase 2. These were in place for that flood in February. They've held up really well, which is nice to see. And they did actually work pretty well in diverting that water, even though the side channel itself is not cleared out. So the main purpose here is just to reduce the inundation interval for that side channel and make it better habitat more often, I suppose, is the best way to phrase that. And by restoring these natural processes where we would have had water in that channel pretty frequently, I'm hoping to see some benefits for waterfowl, also for the riparian forest, and then in clearing out that channel a little bit so you see more water moving through it, to the extent that fish do, like out-migrating smolts are trained in there, hopefully they'll be able to get out easily. Right now, there's a lot of blockages, and if they do end up in there in a high flood period, it's difficult for them to escape. So here's the map for that. You can see here are the two structures that we have completed already, and then this channel does exist already. This is just to kind of illustrate what the project area is, but the work has only been going on at a few selected spots within this project area, just clearing out blockages in the channel, and then potentially constructing some outlet structures down here at the end. But this one is also in permitting right now. We're kind of just getting started on that. It's not likely to qualify for a nationwide permit, so it's going to be a little bit more involved than the North Drain project. Sorry, I didn't change the title here. We did some revegetation work. You can see it's coming in nicely, at least this spring. It did dry up during the summer, but I'm hoping it'll come back. And here's kind of a fun progress pic, if you can see this. So this is one of the cottonwoods that we planted for this project, and it got flooded out. It's even hard to see the cottonwood itself in this picture, but this is the same little wire cage that we have with cottonwoods, and that's in August. So they really enjoyed being flooded there in February and have done very well. So this might be familiar if any of you were at the Washington Planting Symposium back in June, but we contracted out through Natural Systems Design an investigation of what's happening to the cottonwood forest along the Hto Reach. And basically the answer is that it's not regenerating as fast as we might like. So we're still seeing those erosional processes and senescence that lead to loss of forest, and we're not seeing as much regeneration as we need to replace that. And the issue doesn't appear to be seedling recruitment. Those still come in just fine, but due to issues with how the river is regulated, you don't get high enough water events so that, and high enough intermittent water events so that you see seedling recruitment at high levels. You just see it at levels that get immediately flooded the next year, and then you lose those seedlings. And this is just a graphic for that. You can see the red is loss, the green is gain, and then the blue is maintained forest between 1949 and 2015. This is up near Buena and Zilla. And basically the takeaway here is that there's more red than green going on. So you're losing more forest than you're gaining in that about 65-year period. And the takeaway here is a little grim. Based on the trajectory of loss so far, and also expecting that because a lot of these trees actually established pre-hydro regulation, so back in the potentially teens and 20s and 30s, those trees are going to be approaching senescence in the next century, and we're going to lose them, and it doesn't look like they're going to get replaced at a sustainable rate. So we're likely to see something like this picture here with some old legacy cottonwoods, and then a lot of non-native forbs and shrubs moving in. So things that we're looking to do here in the next couple of years, do some more studies like this in other reaches, or work with partners to do those studies and see if those same things are, same trends are still going on. And then also looking at what restoration methods we can use as kind of a stopgap measure that are actually effective in restoring cottonwoods. We have some projects planned for that. Actually, one of them is around the side channel that Marcelo was showing that had some nice cool water in it. So that's kind of a fun connection there. And then also trying to figure out if management of flows for the benefit of cottonwoods and for fish and other species is possible, and what that might look like, and maybe trying to do some predictive modeling on that front. So lots to chew on in the future, and hopefully we can get some projects on the ground as well. And with that, any questions?
Thanks, Bridger. We had one question from Becca. She wanted to know why the project didn't qualify for NW27.
I think it may yet qualify for that. A little hard to say. That project was not brought up in my meeting with the Army Corps. I kind of tossed up there that we wanted to like remove blockages along 4 miles of channel, and I think that kind of freaked them out. But maybe we can con our way into using that 27 permit. That is what's working for the North Drain, so I think it's possible we can do that. But if not, the reason is just that it's a fairly large in scale project.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining our meeting and giving that update. So we're going to take just a 5-minute break, a real short break, so everyone can stretch, get a fresh cup of coffee or something to eat, and then be back in 5 minutes. And then we're a few minutes behind, but not too bad. And then we are going to shift gears from habitat projects to the water quality projects. So be back at about 11:13 and we'll get started. Looks good, Rich. Your audio there?
Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right. I can't show myself because I'm in my office actually, and my dock doesn't allow my laptop to be open, so everyone just imagine what I look like.
I can pull up a photo.
Sure. Animate its mouth while I'm talking.
All right, I'm going to take a quick break and I will be back to you here.
Okay.
So for those of you that are waiting, I was just going to mention that if you joined after we had done roll call this morning and you didn't send us your name, agency, and where you're calling from in the chat box, please feel free to do that. I feel like we need some background music or something while we're on hold.
I can start singing, Marcy.
Let's not. Well, I don't know. I guess I've never heard you sing, Mark. So
There's a reason for that.
Anyone know how Ralph Lampman's Lamprey Raps did in the Eurofishing song contest?
I have no idea what you're talking about, Alex.
Only you, Alex. Only you.
I don't know that Ralph's on the call, but he had some of his lamprey songs were competing in an international song competition for the International Fish Passage Day. So, you know, voting closed recently, so I didn't know if we heard.
Nice. Okay, I think we are at time. So, Rich, you want to go ahead and take it away? Rich is with USGS, and he's out of the Washington Water Science Center out of Tacoma, right, Rich?
Correct. All right, so thanks everybody for being here today. If you were at my talk on this topic back in March or April, whenever it was, it seems like years ago at this point, a lot of what you'll see here will be review, mainly because a lot of the data collection for this project just wrapped up within the last few weeks or so. But I do have a couple new things to show. So if you did see that talk, then there'll be a couple new things. If you didn't, then it'll all be new to you. All right, so first, well, actually, I'm going to talk about two projects we have going on with Benton Conservation District. The first is on water quality and its relation to water stargrass. And then the second one is looking at thermal refuge dynamics, where we've monitored a bunch of these side channels on the lower river. So to first start off the acknowledgements of funding sources, we're working closely with Benton Conservation District and through the Centennial Grant with Ecology. And there's also some funding from the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, and we've been collaborating with folks at the Yakima Nation as well, Tom and Bridger specifically. So the first project I'm going to talk about is our water quality project, and this just summarizes here in one slide what we're doing. As many of you know by now, we've installed 3 continuous water quality sites on the lower Yakima River. One just below the Prosser Dam. We added the water quality monitoring to our long-term flow gauge at Kiona. And then we added a new site down on Basin as well, down by the bridge. And you saw some of that temperature data that Toby showed earlier from Basin was from that site. The parameters we're measuring are the big 5: temperature, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, pH, turbidity. But we're also measuring light through PAR sensor and getting some estimates of stage, because we're hoping to use some of this dissolved oxygen data to calculate metabolism at these sites. So to look at some of the processes going on, not just the parameters themselves. And we also were fortunate enough to have a few continuous nitrate sensors available to us that we were able to add into this project sort of as a last minute bonus. And so we have a continuous nitrate sensor also at Kiona and at Basin. I'm not going to show any of the nitrate data today because it's a little bit longer, a little bit more involved to sort of see that data. And you know, really without flow, it's kind of hard to look at upstream, downstream differences because there is processing that goes along with that. But we will be looking at that data in more detail as we go through the analysis and reporting. The 2 gauges at Prosser and Kiona were started in June 2018, and Basin a little bit later, August 2018, because we had to have pretty much get permission at that site for access and sort of establish a brand new site. We had to establish a brand new site at Prosper as well, but the area we did that with much better communication with the access point through the wastewater treatment plant there, so we were able to get onto that one pretty quick. And we continued this data collection for 2 years, and actually a little more than 2 years. We were supposed to end around June or so of this year in 2020, but once these things are out and running, it's a lot easier to keep them running than it is to pull them out and redeploy them. So we just left them in running through the summer, so we would get essentially 3 summers worth of data at these sites. The other part of this project is to also sample the water stargrass at these sites, looking at estimating percent cover and biomass, and to look at if we can see relationships between water quality and plant growth. So we all know what this can look like in the summer and in like a forest out there. And the reason why we're interested in these dynamics between plants and water quality is that if we look at the diurnal fluctuations in dissolved oxygen and pH, they're related to each other. So as we have more photosynthesis, and that photosynthesis uses up oxygen in the water, and then at night when there's respiration and dissolved oxygen increases, we also see changes in pH. And this is also temperature dependent, so there's a lot of different factors going on here, but we know that it's a very dynamic system, and the plants, this will happen naturally, whether you have a little bit of plants or a lot of plants, but we wanted to look at, you could see relationships between the amount of plants and what these changes look like. So updates from my talk back in the spring, we finished this monitoring through September 2020, like I mentioned, and we also did another summer worth of sampling of stargrass. So in June and August, we collected more stargrass samples. And these are still, they're all dried, but we're still sort of going through the number crunching for that. So I don't have any of the new biomass data for that. We are also waiting to sort of update some of the water quality time series data. So what I'll be showing today is a lot of it is sort of unapproved or not unapproved, or it's not really bad data, but it just hasn't gone through our QC process. So it's going to be all sort of provisional data and finalized, between now and when the report. So I'm going to show a couple of these plots. This is the whole data series. This is the daily maximum temperature at the 3 locations. I'll talk a little bit about how this is laid out because they're all going to be similar. The colors are going to be the same, etc. So Prosser, which is the most upstream, is blue. Kiona in the middle, which is orange, and Van Giesen downstream in gray. So this shows the daily maximum temperature through this period. And if we plot on here the 21-degree criteria for the lower river, we see, and as no surprise, that pretty much almost every day in the summer, we're over that value at some point during the day. Again, this is maximum temperature, so it's not like it's above that 24/7, but every day almost in the summer, these sites, we see that increase. Here's the dissolved oxygen minimums. And again, the criteria here is 9 milligrams per liter. So similar, we have this summertime periods where we have almost every day below this criteria. The gray line here is the Van Giesen gauge. We had some telemetry issues, and so the data was logging internally, and a lot of this noise here is going to be smoothed out and corrected. It's just that we're still sort of working through this QC process, so we can kind of, it's not like there's something crazy going on there. We just have to do some recalculation of that data based on the sensor properties. And then again, here's the daily range in VO. So essentially the difference between min and max. And this is pretty interesting because we see that the largest range, VO range, is at Kiona, and the smallest is at Prosser. And this is going to be for sure related to the flow, the hydrology, and also plant dynamics that we see at these 2 sites. And then here's just a difference in temperature. So there was some interest in looking at how temperature changes as we go downstream. So what I did here was the blue line shows the difference between the temperature at Prosser and Kiona. And then the orange line is the difference between Van Giesen and Kiona. So, so the blue line is basically showing that between, we take Prosser minus Kiona, the positive numbers are showing that from flow from Prosser to Kiona is actually, it's less at Kiona than it is at Prosser. So there's probably some cooling that's going on overall. But when we look at the Van Giesen minus Kiona, there's some days, sometimes where it's positive, sometimes it's negative, but you see there's a lot less of a difference between the two. So it's almost showing like if we take that lower reach from Van Giesen to Prosser, the lower part from Van Giesen to Kiona, there isn't as much difference in temperature between those two sites as there is as we look at Prosser to Kiona. So the biomass estimates we did, I showed a lot more of this data back in April. I'm just going to show basically one or so slides here, but they all show similar patterns. We do see differences in biomass in grams per meter squared at the 3 sites. Prosser had the highest amount because it's really sort of a lower flow and a lot deeper, so the plants are much bigger compared to, for example, at Van Giesen. At Kiona, this figure here shows on the left side the stargrass biomass over time. And so the sample order here, this was in 2018. And then here are 3 sample points from 2019. And we see that we see an increase in biomass as the summer goes on. And with this increase, we see an increase initially in dissolved oxygen, but then we have this weird decrease in September. And similar here with the maximum temperature, we see an increase with this increase, but even though the plants are increasing here, we see a decrease in the temperature. And I think this is partly related to, we were sampling this last time in mid-September when the water was, the river was definitely getting cooler just because of seasonality. So even though we see an increase in plants in September here with not a concurrent increase in DO range or temperature, I just think this is an anomaly or an artifact of the climate and the season changing. So if we just look at the sort of more more middle of the summer numbers, we do see an increase in biomass is kind of showing an increase in DO range and also an increase in maximum temperature. At Van Giesen, we see the same thing, but here we do see this increase over the 3 time periods in DO range. But again, the temperature is, I think, just going down because we're starting to see changes in weather patterns. I'm going to skip through this real quick, but essentially other things that are going on with the stargrass is with some physical observations. Prosser, like I mentioned, is much deeper, slower velocity. So we have really big plants there on sort of the margins of the river. Kiona, it's much more fast flowing, mid-range depths. There's big plants on the margins, but there's also smaller to medium-sized plants like almost everywhere you look. So it's a really good conditions for growth there. At Van Giesen, we see a lot variable cross-section of the channel there, where we have deep parts on one side, shallow on the other side. It's much more fast-flowing and shallow on the one part, so the plants are much smaller, I think just because of the high flow energies that are there. So we definitely we can see that the hydrology is influencing the amount and size of plants that we're seeing. All right, so the Thermal Refuge project, and I'm kind of switching gears here. We had a continuous temperature loggers at 8 locations on the lower river. 4 sites we started in 2018, 4 sites we started in 2019. And these included a lot of the sites that were already mentioned, Eamon Wasteway, the I-182 side channel, Fox Island, which is a little side channel that's near the Van Giesen gauge, Spring Snipes Creek, and then in 2019 we added in Harkins Channel, Corral Creek, and then 2 sites upstream in the Hto Reach. This just shows how some of the methods we use for doing these temperature installations. So the updates for this are, we retrieved all the temperature loggers in early October 2020, and we were able to get all the ones we put out back except 2. And of the 2 that we didn't get, we found the spike that one was on, but the logger somehow got pulled off, which was interesting since this was on there with braided wire. And then the other one we just couldn't find at all. I think it was buried somehow, and we had our metal detector and all this stuff, but we just it was lost. Or someone took it out. I don't think so. We also did in the summer, in August, we completed a longitudinal survey of the I-182 side channel. This was a pilot project we were going to be doing some thermal image flights on with through our drone program, but as some of you may or may not know, the Department of Interior grounded all of our drone flights a year or so ago because of fears that Chinese were going to steal our data and everything, because a lot of the drones we use were manufactured there. So we had to improvise, and we did some other studies there instead. So again, we're in the process of analyzing this data. We just collected it back. But in general, what we see is a cooling influence on the main stem during summer from these side channels, and a warming influence on the main stem. But I did want to highlight what we saw at Corral Creek, because as Marcy mentioned, this is a place that we're going to be doing some new work. And this is a picture of a visible image of where Corral Creek enters the main stem. And when we take a picture with a handheld thermal image camera, we can see this darker purple area is cooler water compared to that main stem with the more pinkish purple. And then the same thing downstream. So here I'm looking downstream where the channel comes in here, and we see this cool plume here. And this is consistent with some of those images that Marcy was showing from the thermal imaging flights at the Corral Creek location. So the Corral Creek temperature data, we had, this was one of the sites we couldn't find one of the temperature sensors. The one we couldn't find was, or the one that was lost was like right here. So we have the boundaries, which is what we really needed to care about here. And we had one in the tributary, one just upstream of it, and one downstream of it to look at how temperature changed. And here's what we saw. The Corral Creek is in blue, and upstream mainstream temperature is in orange. So we saw that similar thing in summer, in winter months, the tributary is a little bit warmer, and in the summer months, it's cooler. And when we look at the difference, anything that's above the zero here is cooler, and then down here is warmer. So we see that in the summer, or in the summer here, we are seeing a few degrees, sometimes some days up to 5 or 6 degrees cooler in that tributary than we see in the main stem. And then this upstream minus downstream, this orange one is basically showing us, well, if we look at the difference between these two, like how persistent is that cooling? And a lot of the times it's not that much, but we do see in the summer that there are some differences here, especially where we're seeing some cooler water as we move downstream. This is our walkthrough of the I-182 side channel profile. These dots aren't super informative, but it's mainly because short of the temperature coming in from this pond that Marcy was showing earlier on her slide, where the tributary temperature here is about 18 degrees compared to 23 degrees coming in the side channel at this point. We don't really see much persistent mixing as we go through this side channel. There is a little bit of a dip in temperature between where this inlet comes in between these two sites, but the change in temperature is like a half a degree at most or so, maybe 0.7. And then it doesn't really change much as we sort of walk through here. But this was, we were out here with a thermal image camera, handheld camera, and did some spot measurements with this. All right, so I'm kind of out of time. So this is my sort of summary, which I discussed a lot of already. And our next steps really are finalizing all the data, getting the report out, doing some metabolism calculations, and just kind of getting it all wrapped up. So with that, I'm not sure if I have time for questions, but if anyone does, you know how to get a hold of me.
Thanks, Rich. I appreciate the project updates. And so this grant is Rich has mentioned is wrapping up. We are in the final stages of it. So the report workup should hopefully be coming out here then within the next 6 months to a year. So as we get everything finalized and done. So with that, we are going to move on to Justin Billings with PNNL, who is going to continue our discussion of water stargrass with kind of a different take that he's been doing. Justin, are you?
I got
There
the
we
mic on. Turn
Perfect.
the camera on. I see open system preferences to share screen, and I don't see the system preferences box. Okay, here it is. It looks like I'm going to have to go through permissions to allow my machine to take control. So if you wanted to swap presentations, it would take me 2 or 3 minutes, either way.
Okay, well, do we want to have, is Emily may have similar, I don't know if it's a PNNL issue. Emily, are you online? Not hear from Emily.
Marcy, do you want to try just opening it up on your screen and then handing the controls over?
Yeah, do you want to just run it through from my screen, Justin?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it in any case. Not quickly anyway.
Nope, that's fine. Let's just run it from mine, and I will keep my hands off my computer so that I don't take back control.
Okay.
Bear with us for a minute, everyone, while we...
Sure. I can take a minute. I'll introduce myself. My name is Justin Billing. I'm a chemical engineer with the Chemical and Biological Processing Group at PNNL. So we're the biofuels wing. And we were contacted with, I guess, this opportunity to evaluate the water stargrass as a biofuel feedstock as a wet aquatic plant. It matches the profile of wet biomass that works well for the process we've developed. And so we made the arrangements to get the sample and did a kind of a preliminary characterization, and that's what we're reporting today. You can go to the next slide.
I think I gave you controls. Go ahead, see if you can run your computer. There you go.
So we work, I skipped 2. We work in the Bioproduct Science and Engineering Laboratory, which is a cooperation between Washington State University, Tri-Cities, and PNNL. So we have labs, greenhouses, and shared space, offices space with the WSU researchers that allows for cooperation on biomass, bioenergy, bioproducts topics. And so developing methods from all forms of biomass to either fuels or value-added chemicals. And let's see, next slide. Sorry. So the challenge is, as we understand it, is that water stargrass is an aquatic nuisance, and the abundance of water stargrass disrupts the gravel spawning areas by slowing down the river and leading to sedimentation. So the question is, once harvested, is the stargrass biomass something that can be processed to recover energy or nutrients? And looking at how you approach and manage wet organics or wet biomass, there's the hierarchy. This graphic is from Washington State Department of Ecology. And where our technology or approach would fit is in on-site or off-site organics management. So we assume probably, straightforward way that the option to feed people water stargrass or to feed animals water stargrass as a way to take care of the biomass are probably off the table. But you could do composting or a chemical process or any of these organic managements that are preferred to landfilling, incineration, and other sort of basic, like bottom of the pyramid ways of dealing with the biomass. So that's sort of how we approach the problem. I will look at the HTL process. So hydrothermal liquefaction is a thermochemical transformation process where wet biomass of many different kinds can be transformed ultimately all the way to hydrocarbon transport fuels like gasoline, jet, and diesel in good yields. So we've developed an end-to-end process for taking, in some cases, sewage, sludge, algae, food waste, crop residues like wheat straw, and woody biomass, various kinds of aquatic plants, so microalgae especially, and to some extent we have tested macroalgae. And the process works through high temperature in the condensed phase of water at high pressures, so to keep it in sort of a continuous phase to depolymerize and then transform the depolymerized biopolymers into a crude oil that then is upgraded in the way that a refinery upgrades oils to make the fractions. So there's several advantages to this process. The reactor is relatively simple. The biocrude produced is thermally stable compared to other bioprocessing routes, and it can accept a pretty wide range of feedstocks. Here's our sampling plan. So we received feedstock. My colleague Andy Schmidt met Rich at the Van Giesen Street site and collected a 5-gallon bucket of stargrass in June. And we homogenized some of it to assess pumpability. So pumping through a continuous reactor is an important part of the characterization study. And then the other part, of course, you would dry, powderize, and then sample for solids percent, ash percent, and ash content, as well as a basic proximate analysis of the feed. All these things are directed at, is this a good bioenergy feedstock? So here's some photos from the characterization. We use a coffee mill grinder to powderize. We also use an immersion blender to homogenize the liquid feed. So after, it was 2 hours of formatting with the stick mixer to get something that we would consider a pumpable slurry. And so at least on the pumpability part, even though the solids concentration was low, we determined that a pumpable slurry, especially if blended with other biomass, was possible. And we'll skip next here. I'll get the button for. And some of the results of our analysis. So after drying and ashing the material, we found that the dry solids content of the sample we had was high at 7.5% roughly, with an ash content of 37%. And the proximate analysis revealed that there wasn't a lot of lipids, which are the most useful for making biofuels, and relatively high carbohydrates. So for direct application of the HTL technology, we would probably screen this type of a feedstock out as something that would be challenging or maybe a not great fit for the technology. But we had developed for macroalgae and other emerging feedstocks a sequential process where we first dissolve out a lot of the starch and carbohydrates and then make a centrifuge between those two to make a high solids residue that we convert to fuel, and then the starch stream can be fermented or used for some other bioprocessing scheme. And so I guess overall, looking at the data, first take of the data, that hydrothermal processing has advantages, but immediately, in this context, composting is probably a preferred option just due to the total biomass resource, the scale, and sort of the seasonal, come and go of the feedstock. If there was an existing biorefinery and this was a, potential feedstock that could be added to it, that would be certainly something to explore. Well, one may or may not make a biorefinery concept around water stargrass. And here are the metal concentration results by ICP OES, and this is a run-in duplicate on our system. And what we found, in addition to silica, which is expected, and then calcium and sodium, which you expect, what seemed to us in the analysis is a fairly high amount of potassium recovered in the plant. So as something just to note, the water stargrass may be good for remediating some of the excess nutrient in the river. And so there'd be some discussion as to whether, harvesting all the way, like uprooting it or just trimming it, would be the appropriate strategy. We are looking at, let's say, cyanobacteria in the mineral content of that and macroalgae to see whether rare earth elements or elements in seawater or other waters could be relatively concentrated in the plants, and then again concentrated by HTL to be a feasible way of mining or drawing sort of rare elements out of water. And so that's one thought that we had. I think that is the end of the presentation, and I wanted to leave time, and I know I probably used up what I had, but we're happy to have this contact and kind of collaboration and take a look at water stargrass as a feedstock.
Great, thank you, Justin. You're actually right on time to your 10 minutes. So if anybody has some questions.
Yeah, this is Andy Schmidt, and I work with Justin, and just wanted to note that we are changing directions in our microalgae program this year. And so we may have some room in our scope to take another look at this, because we're looking at basically low value aquatic and macroalgae, as Justin noted. So we may have another pass at this later in the fiscal year.
Great, thank you for the follow-up. So maybe we can be in touch and as that develops.
Yeah.
If you end up. Great, thank you so much, Justin.
Yeah, this is Lane Young at Ecology, and I have a truth to share with you that I actually collected some stargrass and dried it and prepared it as a additive to salad. And I found the silica extremely high. I was wondering if you were looking into the metabolism of the animals, how that might be affected by the silica.
Oh, I can answer that. This is Rachel with Benton Conservation District. We, in cooperation with South Yakima Conservation District, did a livestock feed analysis on water stargrass several years ago, and the high silica content was one of the things that suggested it would not be palatable to livestock. It's high protein for a feed source for livestock, but not likely that the animals will enjoy eating it.
Okay, and with that, I'm gonna move us on to Emily Graham. Emily, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, Mark, if you could pass off controls. And Emily is also with Pacific Northwest National Labs and recently made the connection as they are starting the next funding of their 3-year cycle, and some of the work that they are interested in doing. They I will let Emily give her introduction and pass it on. So is it?
Yeah. Oops. Hold on one second. I haven't used this before, so hopefully it will let me share my screen. Awesome. Do you guys see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
We do. We see your full like mine.
Oh. Huh. Okay. Well, if you guys don't mind, I might just, for sake of time, give it like this. Do you guys see the right thing now?
That looks good.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Marcy, for the introduction. Like you said, I am part of PNL. I work on the Subsurface Biogeochemical Research Program. We're a very different program than the one that was just talked about. So this should be an awesome breadth of sort of the research that's going on at PNL. We're funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. So we are a fundamental research program. However, we do care a lot about the broader implications of our work, and I can talk about some of the things we've been doing in that respect. We're led by Tim Scheibe, who couldn't be here today. He's our PI, and then Xingyan Chen, James Stegan, and myself are co-PIs on the project. So I'm here today to kind of give you an overview of what we've been doing. Traditionally, we've been working at the Hanford Reach, and over the next 3 years, which our triennial period just started this October, we're really shifting focus to study the Yakima River Basin in detail. So we're super excited to be here today and totally open to collaboration. If anything you're doing is complementary or to us, or anything we're doing seems super interesting, I'm happy to talk about it further. So our project really focuses on 2 aspects of the river corridor. One is hydrologic exchange zones, and the other is biogeochemistry. So hydrologic exchange zones are areas of groundwater upwelling, or more generally, groundwater surface water exchange. These are highly chemically and biologically reactive. So they're very important for contaminant remediation, as well as river corridor metabolism and biogeochemistry in general. In terms of biogeochemical processes, we study a lot of organic matter cycling. We also study nitrogen cycles in details and are starting to look into the phosphorus cycle as well. We've also historically had a lot of focus on contaminants out at the Hanford site, as well as agricultural contaminants, particularly nitrate. So our scientific grand challenge is really to understand river corridor function from reaction all the way to basin scale. That's a huge challenge, but we have a lot of fun doing it. And we really look at hydrologic exchange flows in detail, as well as organic matter chemistry. We have a lot of capabilities at the lab that are pretty rare, as well as microbial activity and a growing focus on disturbance as well. Particularly historically, we've looked at dam impacts. We're now moving into wildfire disturbances as well, and precipitation events. And so what this looks like is typically we work at a local scale in a lot of different locations. And this is sort of how a system might work holistically at the local scale. So you have groundwater surface water exchange that can be impacted by disturbances, particularly hydropeaking from dams can really impact the amount of water going into and out of the subsurface. In the subsurface, there's a lot of various microorganisms as well as organic matter, nitrogen, contaminants that are cycled within that zone and then transported back out to the river corridor. Those products, as well as oxygen consumption and temperature changes, can have really big impacts on fish in the river corridor, as well as all the way up to other trophic levels as well. So we then take this kind of local scale mechanistic understanding, and then we use a multi-scale modeling approach to feed that into reaction networks, reactive transport models, and subsequently into reduced order models that allow us to make predictions at the scale of the Yakima River Basin and within the next couple of years, hopefully at the scale of the entire Columbia River Basin. So a little more detail on the biogeochemical side. We really, over the last couple of years, have gotten a strong expertise in organic matter chemistry and how that impacts other chemical reactions in the river corridor. So we focus a lot on aerobic respiration, which is basically degradation of organic matter and consumption of oxygen. So this can have a lot of impact on oxygen availability for fish and other animals and plants as well as denitrification and really the whole nitrogen cycle as well. We can characterize most processes and contaminant removal and specifically how these processes all link together. So if you see this diagram, this is sort of an idealized watershed with our new focus on wildfires in here, which I'll talk about in a second. And a lot of the processes we consider, so we consider transport to groundwater, groundwater transport into the river corridor and vice versa, hill slope transport, as well as cycling and the subsurface and the surface water, particularly with emphasis on restoration and denitrification at the moment. And just as an example of our research, we've had some really nice work recently led by Vanessa Garabuso-Caruso that helps us start to tie together all of these different biogeochemical cycles. So she looked at organic matter concentration and nutrient limitations, in this case just nitrogen, and found that at moderate to low concentrations of organic matter, it was really the thermodynamic properties of organic matter itself that influenced oxygen consumption. Whereas when she got into higher levels of organic matter, nutrients start to take over. And so this sort of mechanistic understanding can help us make predictions in novel environments as nutrient loadings and organic matter loadings continue to change. We also have some pretty novel approaches that we like to employ. So we have a sensor network that we're currently developing using both off-the-shelf sensors as well as ones we've developed. We have a postdoc fellow who actually his entire postdoc is sensor development that has really helped us on that. We also have some unique experimental capabilities. So this is just, this is a column experiment. And actually, we've coated the column with a fiber optic sensor that measures oxygen. And so as water is flowing through the column, we can then measure oxygen consumption without disturbing the system and having to pool samples. We also have some capabilities to generate biochars. And our general approach is to take results from field and environmental settings and transfer them into models. So this is just a depiction of various ways we can take this information and put it into reaction networks. We then have other members of our team that takes those reaction networks and can couple them to reactive transport modeling like pFlowtran, as well as even up to higher level models that operate at more of the basin to continental US scale. And I will mention, I think I've mentioned this a little bit in the talk, but we are just starting a big aspect of our project on wildfire impacts on water quality. So that actually just kicked off on October 1st. So we're really ramping this up pretty hard. This leverages our expertise in organic matter chemistry. Pyrogenic or organic matter, or PIOM, has very different chemistry than just natural organic matter. And given our prior results on how organic matter chemistry can really impact other biogeochemical cycles, this is going to be a focus going forward. Fires also have dramatic influences on nutrients and sediment erosion and transport into the river corridor. And so we're in the process of getting permitted to work out at the Evans Canyon fire in the lower Yakima, as well as some smaller fires, the Cold Creek fire and possibly the Jungle Creek fire up in the upper Yakima in the mountains. So if anyone's working on wildfire, we're totally open to collaboration in that aspect. We've also had a large component of our research program on hydrologic exchange flows, particularly most recently on how these can modulate riverbed temperatures and impact fish habitat through its effects on temperature. So this is a figure down here, not from our group, but it just shows that upwelling of relatively cool groundwater can correlate really strong with fish spawning habitat. In this case, this was trout they were looking at. And this is in large part because subsurface temperatures tend to be more stable than surface water. So they're not affected as much by atmospheric change or changes in light that can really drive temperatures. And one thing that's really unique that we've found is that the near surface riverbeds, the hyperrheic zone, actually can be colder at times of year than either the river water or the inland groundwater. So this is experimental work looking at thermistor rods that we stuck into the subsurface. And this is not at all what we expected, but we actually hypothesized a storage effect where in the winter, surface water actually got really cold, was exchanged into the subsurface, and then had a storage effect that allowed colder water to persist in the riverbeds. And we were actually able to validate this via modeling approaches. This is a nice paper by Xu Hong Song that actually layers hydropeaking in this line of research as well. So he found that in the winter, hydropeaking could drive really cold surface water into the hyperrheic zone. And as spring progressed, this cold water sort of stayed there, and there was a storage effect where the riverbed stayed way colder than we expected. So there was a lag of several months where the riverbed was really much colder than surface water that facilitated a nice fish spawning habitat. Taking this one step further, on the bottom here, we've also looked at hydrogeomorphology and how that may affect salmon spawning habitat. So this figure on the left is actually pulled from publicly available data. This is a Hanford Beach area on the Columbia River. The black here is salmon spawning zones. And then on the right here, our classification we did with machine learning approaches on different hydrogeomorphic features of the river corridor itself. And you can see that the black zones here in this classification approach map up fairly well with salmon spawning area. And so these are areas we call glides, areas that tend to have groundwater upwelling. And so this is a line of research that we're really interested in pursuing further. We have both experimental and modeling efforts that sort of lend credibility to this. And then quickly, I'll end on a couple opportunities to collaboration. I'm really passionate about community engagement as well as other members of our PI team. So going forward in the next couple of years, we're developing our sampling and sensor network plan. It will be focused on the Yakima River Basin. We're planning to have over 30 sites that we go out to at various time periods, including these wildfire impacted sites, and take sediment and surface water samples. And then after that, we'll maintain some work in the Yakima River Basin, but we're going to try to go to a larger scale to the whole Columbia River Basin. I will say that community science has been a large part of our program over the last couple years. Just a couple examples. We have actually solicited via Twitter and using social media an open call for collaborators that wanted to work on a perspectives paper together. And so that was really fun. We got about 50 people from across the world that were just interested in disturbance ecology to help with that effort. We also have something called the Wonders Project that organizes very standardized sampling campaigns. We work with other networks, the LTER, NEON, and CZOs as well. We provide sampling kits. We do all the analysis. We give access to instruments that aren't common at some universities or government agencies. And then we make data publicly available. So that's something we're really passionate about as well. So on that, I will end it there. If you have any questions, I can take a couple now, or feel free to reach out to myself or any of the co-PIs on the project.
Thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate your willingness to be part of this today. We had, for background to others in the basin, that we had connected with Tim and Emily and Amy and James initially as they were looking for partners in collecting samples as part of their Wonders program. And we're moving into the Yakima Basin, and we're looking to create connections and partners within our our network. And one of the things that is so great about our basin is that we do have a wonderful connectivity between the headwaters all the way down to the mouth and partnerships. And so I think there's a lot of potential there for us to, as they begin to move into looking at research in Yakima River, along with our Columbia Basin research, that we can, provide some connections and partnership opportunities. So, and then if you have questions, please shoot those to Emily, and I am going to then move us on to, I think, Matt, are you starting first with an update? Matt and Abby with Washington State Department of Ag.
Yep. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thanks, Matt. Go ahead.
All right. It looks like my slide is showing. Oh, oops. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be talking about the bubble up, or it's the WSDOT wet pond that was mentioned a couple times. Oh, oops. Trying to move some things around here. Okay. So is the photograph of the wet pond, is it showing?
Yes, you're good. Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. So this is Abby and I at the bubble up, or the wet pond. I have the water quality sensor lowered into that pipe, and so from this pipe there's water bubbling up into this WSDOT pond, and there's noticeable particles of what looks like sand bubbling up to, and it's depositing around the pipe, and that's what Abby and I are standing on. So you have this kind of this sand bench around this pipe that we're standing on. And so I'll just be talking about some water quality values that we collected, and we sampled once in August, on August 25th, and then again on September 28th. And then Abby and I are going to be sampling from there again next week on Monday. So after I'm done talking about the water quality parameters, Abby's gonna talk about some pesticide data that we have from our first sampling event on August 25th. All right, so the reason we're monitoring this location now, we've last spring the site was mentioned, and there was interest in doing some habitat restoration to entice salmon to utilize the thermal refuge here on their during their migration up, and there was nothing known about the water quality there. And so Abby and I thought that we could maybe contribute to the water quality lack of data and provide some information there. So we collected pesticide or water for pesticide analysis, and it's analyzed for, is it between 160 and 170 different analytes. And again, we've only done 2 samples so far, and then we'll be sampling again next week. And we would like to do some more sampling next spring and into the summer as well, give us a better idea what the overall water quality is like at that site. All right. Okay. So here are some of the actual water quality values. And these values are from the water that's coming directly out of that pipe. So on August 25th and then September 28th, I'll show you can see the results here. The water temperature is 18.6 on the 25th of August and 18.4 the 28th of September. And there's really not a whole lot of variation between those 2 events in terms of the water quality parameters. Specific conductivity, you know, it was just thinking that that it was groundwater coming out of this pipe, which is indicative with the high conductivity that we were seeing there, and it's much higher than the specific conductivity values in the Yakima River, and so that would suggest that it is groundwater coming out of this pipe. However, the dissolved oxygen is right about around 100% saturation. So there's something occurring with the water that's causing it to be highly oxygenated, and it may be predominantly groundwater, but there's something occurring that's oxygenating the water. And pH value is around 8. And we also measured flow at from the first berm, so that the first berm just downstream of this pipe, and the CFS is quite low, and we haven't been there enough to see if it differs depending on the season or not. So these are just 2 values here, and I do have some information from the Van Giesen site that I looked up just for comparison. So it should come up. Okay. So again, these are the min and maximum values for the days that we sampled at the bubble up site. So you can see some comparisons, and especially for the water temperature. The water temperature was definitely cooler at the bubble up on August 25th. However, you see the temperatures are a little more similar for the site visit on September 28th, because at September 28th at the bubble up is around 18.4 degrees C, and the dissolved oxygen, it's also, I included the min and max there for the Van Giesen site. Oh yeah, and the Van Giesen, it's about 4 miles upstream of the bubble up site, so 4 river miles upstream. And then the conductivity, you can see the conductivity is quite low compared to the bubble up, where the bubble up's over 800 for specific conductivity, and the Yakima River is usually around 250 or so. So Abby and I, we do collect samples for nutrients there as well. And the Van Giesen, I didn't find any nutrient data. It sounds like there is some being collected, but up at Kiona, there is a nitrate sensor up there, and Abby will show some of the nutrient data, but at Kiona, it looks like it's 0.9 to just over 1.0 milligrams per liter of nitrate. So Abby will show a little information for that with our other samples for comparison there. And that's all I have. And then if you want to transfer it to Abby from this point, that'd be, I also should mention that we don't really know the full pathway that this water travels, so we don't know the exact, source of this water and what activities could influence the water quality here. So it'd be nice to find out the exact source of it, so we can maybe provide some outreach and education if that's needed. So, all right, thank you.
Abby, are you on mute?
Oh dear, there we go. I started talking. Well, now you can hear me as well as see my slide. So as Matt mentioned, yeah, we had 171 analytes, and that included pesticides, nutrients, and TSS. And again, I'm only presenting data here for our August of 2020 site visit. We don't have those other results in quite yet. So out of those 171, did somebody say something? Out of those 171, we detected 12. All of them were herbicides. So we have other insecticides, fungicides, and whatnot in the analyte list, but all of what we found were all herbicides. And all of these detections compared to EPA's aquatic life benchmarks were at least 100 times lower than EPA's aquatic life benchmark, so 1/100th. And that was for plants. As you move to the fish aquatic criteria, you get into the thousands to tens of thousands below those criteria. So this is generally promising, and that what we have seen is not very high in concentration, especially relative to other sites that we have. And other times of the year, we do see other pesticides that do approach those or exceed those benchmarks. So relatively clean so far. And as Matt was mentioning, the source of this water is a little bit of a question, but because all of these herbicides are highly soluble, that is another point to make towards maybe it's mostly groundwater because these are so soluble. We're not seeing any of those hydrophobic compounds. And then of the nutrients, we had 3 detections. The nitrate plus nitrite together were 10.1 milligrams. There is a human health drinking water criteria of EPA at 10 milligrams per liter, but again, this is those 2 combined, so whether or not that actually exceeded for the nitrate criteria, we don't know. And then total phosphorus at 0.074 and orthophosphate at 0.0557. And I just want to make the point that this was just one sampling event, so it's really difficult for us to make any conclusions about the site in general because we know things will change throughout the year. It's a very, very quick snapshot that Matt and I were able to put together for this sampling season. And you have my contact information there below, and to the right, that's all the compounds I just decided to list in case you guys were curious, but I won't name them all. And that's it. It's kind of short and sweet. So if you have any questions for me, or if you need to move on, we can do that too.
Thanks, Abby. It's great that you guys are able to wrap this into your greater sampling plan with the other locations that you are monitoring. Does anyone have any quick questions before we move on? And so I'm gonna make a note as we move on. So our last water quality section, it's the Department of Ecology. And so we've combined, Jim Carroll was going to give us an update on the water quality model status. Department of Ecology has been working on a water quality model for the Yakima River. I got an email from him this morning, however, that he was not feeling well. So he told us that he will hopefully have model results to show at the next meeting, and gave his regards that he was not up to being able to participate with us today. So I also, real quick, I want to add Jennifer Parsons, who's been doing a lot of the flowering rush work on the lower Yakima River. And I think before we kick in, since Jim Carroll's not here, I would like to Jennifer, if you're on, if you could just give us a quick update on your work, and then we'll move into Echo and then Lane.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great.
Just a quick update. Probably most of you are familiar with flowering rush, hopefully, but if not, it is a Class A noxious weed, meaning it's a real high priority for the state. And the reason it's such a high priority is because it can invade aquatic systems in lots of different depths and lots of different habitats. And we've seen it in the Yakima, starting around the Prosser Pool. There's a patch just above the diversion dam there, and it goes down into the Columbia, and it's gotten into the Columbia and goes downstream to as far as Lake Umatilla so far above the John Day Dam. And in the Yakima River, it mostly acts as an emergent plant growing in shallow waters or just above the water line. But in the Columbia, it's growing as a submerged plant out to water 20 feet deep or so. And so it's a real threat to habitat, especially in the Columbia. So we're trying to control it in the Yakima, and the Corps of Engineers is doing a few projects on the Columbia trying to figure out how to control that submerged growth. So we started control work back in 2015 and had been doing 2 treatments a year ever since, except for we always saw a lot fewer plants in our later season treatment. We couldn't do the whole river in 1 week because we were working with fish and wildlife people who are coming over from the coast. And so by the time we got back to the sections of the river we weren't able to treat the first time in September, the plants were already senescing. So this year we decided to cancel that September trip and just make a really long week of it in early August. And so that's what we did this year. Treated all of the plants we could reach. There's still a section between the Prosser Diversion Dam downstream to about the Chandler return that we haven't been able to get to because we've only been treating from airboats, and those boats can't get into that area because it's very rocky. So for our results, it seems like we're getting on top of the population behind the Prosser Dam, but we're really barely holding our own down in the lower parts of the river. And we suspect it's because we haven't been able to get to that stretch right below the Prosser Diversion. And so this year we were really hoping Benton County could get in there and do some work. They've been really good at cooperating with ecology and fish and wildlife on this project, but because of COVID and contracting issues, they weren't able to do that, but we're hoping to get to that stretch next year and hopefully get a little better control downstream of that area. So that's the quick and dirty. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them now or just get a hold of me, and I'm happy to talk about it later.
Thanks, Jennifer. And this is going to be important as we look at water stargrass removal and how we, mitigate one plant but don't create challenges with another plant, and mindful to be aware of what else is happening on our lower river. And so we're going to move then next into Hto. Are you? Hey. Okay. So Mark, we'll have you hand off controls. And if you would like to introduce yourself real quick.
Just 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
And if it doesn't,
Okay.
I do. Got it. There you go. Yep.
Oh, awesome. So, hi, my name is Hto Process. Work with the Department of Ecology in our environmental assessment program. I'm kind of a last-minute substitute for another staff person who's going to present here, and I was asked to just kind of go over what does ecology actually do in terms of water quality monitoring, and especially in the lower Yakima. And I think ecology is probably known more for, the policies, regulation, and maybe working on special projects like TMDLs or effectiveness monitoring. I don't realize that
we actually do quite a bit of long-term monitoring throughout the state. We have some sites that we've been monitoring for 30 or 40 years. So I was just going to go over just a quick overview of some of the long-term monitoring that we do, and then kind of focus on a little bit more on one particular type of monitoring that really does affect the lower Yakima, since it's done on a more regular basis. We have our rivers and streams water quality monitoring. This is our long-term ambient monitoring. We also call it the freshwater ambient program. The monitoring is usually done for looking at trends in stream health over time, but then it could also be used for other projects or kind of contributing to assessment for the 303D list. Then we have river and stream monitoring. Those are our stream flow gauge stations, where we have near real-time stream flow and water quality information. Unfortunately, we don't have, ecology doesn't have any gauges currently down in the lower Yakima, but we have had them from time to time, and those were usually related specifically with TMDL projects. We also do habitat monitoring. We have our ambient biological and watershed health monitoring. There is a water quality component to this, but this is more related to biological and habitat. So we'll collect periphyton and macroinvertebrates, then things like substrate, vegetation, shade, and then we'll tie that back into water quality. The watershed health monitoring program has done some surveys on lower Yakima. I think it's been a few years ago, but it has been done on lower Yakima. And then toxics monitoring. We have our persistent biocumulative toxics monitoring, or PBT monitoring. This also includes freshwater fish contaminants monitoring, mercury, lead, and PBT contaminants in sediment cores. I know PBT monitoring has been done on the Horn Rapids Dam or Wanamish Dam. And I think it's been a few years since we've actually been there, but I think I'm not really familiar with their schedule on that, but I do know some of that has occurred in the lower Yakima. And then, just as Jennifer Parsons just mentioned, our invasive aquatic plant monitoring, which is a statewide effort, and she's out there every year monitoring for plants. And of course, the big one now is the flowering rush. So the one program that we have that really kind of focuses on lower Yakima is through our rivers and streams water quality monitoring. So this is a monthly water quality sampling run. We have long-term stations and sentinel stations. So these are sampled every month and for every year, and we've been doing it for multiple years. We have some sites in the lower Yakima that have been sampled for 30 plus years. But I think the majority of ours are like at least over 10 years. These are primarily sampled for trends, reference conditions, and maybe to support other types of monitoring. And then we also have basin stations. These are typically sampled just for 1 year. We have 3 stations within our region that we utilize every water year. These stations are usually requested by our water quality staff or maybe some other ecology staff that identify certain areas that might be problem areas. They might be on the 303D list, and they just need a little more information to kind of decide kind of what their next steps will be for that particular site. And basin stations have criteria that have to be met, and they go through a whole selection process to be able to choose the final 3 that we have for our station. So in the lower Yakima, I just put together just a short list of what we've done in the last 5 years. So the first 2, Yakima River at Kiona and Yakima River at Nob Hill. Those are our long-term stations. And I realize ecology probably has a slightly different boundary for where the upper Yakima starts. Just based on our past TMDL work, we kind of start the upper Yakima out by Sela. So Nob Hill, that's like right outside Yakima. And then you'll see all the other stations on the list are our basin stations. Last year we had Corral Creek at Old Inland Highway, and then you'll see the other ones in the past few years have been kind of spans the whole lower Yakima. And if you ever want to, I provided links in this document, but if you ever want to, you can just Google Ecology's Freshwater Information Network. It'll come right up, and you can do a search for these stations. You can download the data. You can like see by year what different kinds of parameters were actually collected. And then just in 2020, or water year 21, those two long-term stations are going to be sampled, Yakima River at Kiona and Yakima River at Nob Hill. But we also have a basin station, Snipes Creek near the mouth. That was actually last sampled in 2011 as a basin station, and it was requested again for this water year. And we have a pretty extensive suite of parameters that we collect or measure. So every month we'll have pH, conductivity, temperature, barometric pressure, dissolved oxygen, fecal coliform, E. coli, TSS, total suspended solids, turbidity, ammonia, nitrate, nitrite, total persulfate nitrogen, orthophosphate, and total phosphorus. And then every other month, we also sample for metals analysis. This includes hardness, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, mercury, nickel, silver, and zinc. And then at each of our sites, we install temperature data loggers. And typically we have both an air and a water logger. So, so this year we're going to have 3 sites that will be in the lower Yakima. So, and that is all that I had.
Great, thank you so much. I think that helps as we're beginning to have discussions about what water quality monitoring is happening in the lower Yakima River and how we can kind of coordinate efforts and crossovers. So does anybody have any questions before we move over to Lane, who's with the water quality side of ecology? Okay, I appreciate you filling in for Dan Duggar while he is out, so.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
All right, Mark, if you could pass it on to Lane. And then this is the last of our presentations. And then we'll have a quick discussion and wrap up. We're a little behind time, but not too bad given our new virtual format. Lane, are you?
It's been passed.
Okay. Are you on mute, Lane?
Okay, so now I'm not on mute, but I can't actually receive the screen. I had to cancel it to go off mute. So could you try passing it again? I'm on full mic and camera.
Yeah, Mark will pass it back to you here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, I have your slides as well. So do you see it on your screen, Mark?
No, I've passed it back to her, but for some reason it's not going. So Marcy, you may want to bring it up on yours.
Okay. Oh, you're the train.
Course.
Timing is everything. Okay, let me hand it over to you. Sorry, everybody, as we work out. Appreciate the patience.
Oh, great.
Okay, then Lane, let me give you keyboard controls, just a sec.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to do it for you. It sounds like it's because you're not on the right desktop version. So I will click your slides for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. This is Lane Young with the Water Quality Program. I actually work on TMDLs, and today I'm going to be presenting Pesticide Reduction Alternative Project and the Columbia Snake Temperature TMDL that is an EPA TMDL currently on the Columbia and Snake Rivers. So to begin, I'm going to be narrating for Jane Creech, who is over at the Columbia River work group on toxics. Next slide, please. So the Lower Yakima Pesticides Reduction Project is now a TMDL alternative project. Now we do TMDLs that actually require characterization of both point and non-point sources and blend them together into a work plan. Fortunately, the EPA has supported doing TMDL alternatives, which actually broadens our ability and our leverage with doing research on chemicals like pesticides. So Jane has been working in the Lower Yakima on legacy pesticides for the most part, and those are the pesticides that exceed both state and federal human health criteria for water and fish tissue. This has been a project that's been linked to the fish concentration investigations of the last 5 years that maybe other folks have been following. So the pesticides of concern right now include DDT and all its metabolites, chlordane, chlorpyrifos, dieldrin, and toxaphene. And as you know, at least 3 of those have been banned from use for a long time. So we call them legacy pesticides because they tend to still be present in the sediments of our rivers. So most of these pesticides bind tightly to soil particles at the site of application, and also as the water flows downstream, if it carries those metabolites and the pesticides, then they will bind to other sediments downstream. Major pollutant pathways include, continues to be erosion of soil from agricultural areas where the pesticides are applied. And stormwater has also been traced as a point source for discharge, but right at the moment, our stormwater program is in development. So we expect to have a lot more data flowing through that program in the next couple of years. Marcy, next slide, please. Thank you. So to further reduce these pesticides, additional implementation of BMPs would expand on the successful methods we already have, such as reduction in field runoff by using high efficiency irrigation techniques. So we continue to work with the irrigation fields on those methods, but that has really been extremely successful with both pesticides and reducing turbidity. We also are working with reshaping banks of irrigation waterways to prevent bank sloughing and ensuring that farm fields have untilled vegetated buffers. Future studies we're working on is to identify additional pollution transport mechanisms, such as bottom sediments being transported during floods or other kinds of disruption, and it may include sediment coring in the future. We're looking at collecting and analyzing biofilms for project pesticide analysis, and sediment transport of all kinds. Next slide, please. Thanks, Marcy. So I'm going to wrap this up by talking just briefly about the Columbia and Snake River temperature TMDL that came out in July of this year. Now, the EPA was actually sued by 3 entities between 2018 and November of 2019 when the whole issue went to the Supreme Court, and the courts actually directed EPA to finally wrap up and establish a 20-degree temperature TMDL on the Columbia and Snake Rivers. So the official temperature now on those rivers is 20 degrees. In the mid-Columbia area, it varies upper and lower. The upper temperatures are a little bit lower, from 16 to 19, but for the Yakima tributary, the 20 degrees is the water that is, or is the temperature that's applied to the receiving waters. The temperature TMDL actually directs less than 1 degree reduction for the Yakima River, but keep in mind that this TMDL actually applies to 13 watersheds. So we have under 13 degrees to reduce out of the whole entire watershed in Washington. The original focus was on dams predominantly. However, the EPA is working with Department of Ecology on expanding that to point sources, also working with the states of Idaho and Oregon on same efforts. So we will end up with NPDES and non-point load programs, but we don't have that at this time. We're still working on clarifying exactly what will be expected on the Yakima River over time. So the comment period for this TMDL ended in September, and I'll be coming back to you with future updates as we go. So that's the end of my presentation, and I see that Becca has a question about the 13 watersheds. That's all the watersheds that are in Washington that are adjacent to the Columbia. I can name them off if you wish, but it may take a minute.
No, sorry, that's not what I meant, Lane. You said we needed to achieve a 13-degree reduction. If I understand correctly, you mean in each of those watersheds we need to see a 1-degree reduction?
Approximately. Now, that is unconfirmed at this time. We are still in negotiations with the EPA on what this is going to turn out to be in impacts per watershed per watershed. At this time, there is a less than 1 degree centigrade reduction required for all 13 of the watersheds. Is that clear?
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Any other questions?
Great, thanks, Lane. I think
Thank you.
I'm going to move us along. We just have really one more thing on our agenda item, and if you guys need to take off, I want to stick to our 12:45. But the last part that we had wanted to discuss was water quality monitoring in the Yakima River and the lower river, and kind of what our needs are. And so I just want to bring up this topic. But before I do, there is one person who has been also collecting a lot of data, water quality monitoring data, that I would like to introduce, because he stepped into a new position and taken over Elaine Briard's position, if many of you remember. And so I don't know, is Forrest still on the phone? We may have lost Forrest. If so, I'm looking through the list. I'm not seeing him, but I want to just make sure that many of you know that Forrest has now taken over Elaine Briard's position with the Rosa. Oh, there's Forrest. So I'm not seeing him here on the, no mic. Okay, so Forrest has taken over Elaine Briard's position with the Water Quality Lab, Rosa Sunnyside Board of Joint Control. And so we're excited to have Forrest in that position and encourage you to reach out. And they are continuing all of that great water quality monitoring for many of the drains within their system. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to type Forest into the chat, but I'm hoping that at our next meeting, which will be sometime later next spring, summer, that we can maybe meet in person and you guys can actually see Forest. So with that, we are done with most of the presentation section. So feel free to take your cameras, off if you guys want to go ahead and become visible. And the last part that we want to discuss, in the near recent future, we've had a lot of discussions about how do we coordinate water quality monitoring in the Yakima River. We have a lot of agencies, a lot of entities that are all collecting water quality monitoring data, and that's part of what this meeting is about. Originally we started these meetings back in 2015. Actually, it was 2016. It was after the 2015 drought year when there were 3 different organizations all collecting temperature data at Kiona, and nobody was, sharing left hand with the right hand information. And so it was one of those things where we all kind of happened out to the site and were out there all collecting data at the same time. And that's how we kind of found out that, multiple people were collecting drought data. So these meetings were really a opportunity to start bringing together those different threads. Water quality data really provides a lot of the pulse of your river. It's like going to your doctor and getting your blood pressure and your vitals. It just kind of gives you a statement of what is the health of your river, and it has a lot of threads between our modeling work, our habitat restoration work, our cool water refuge work, and our water stargrass dynamics, nutrients, and public health. And so there is a lot of pieces that this ties into. So with so many organizations collecting data, we wanted to start discussing, how do we coordinate those efforts? How do we find out who's collecting what? And what are our gaps? Where can we fill in data that we are missing? We have the 3 loggers for USGS that have been part of that Centennial study that Rich showed you that are in the lower Yakima River. Those all went offline October 1st. That funding is wrapping up. And so, it brought into the discussion of, is there value to keep some of those sites going? If so, where do we fill in some other sites? So if, I think in the interest of time, what, we've been discussing with Alex and others is that, it would be best to maybe form a technical advisory group as an offshoot with some of the people that are coordinating water quality monitoring data and collecting it, and kind of discuss where to take this conversation the next level. But for the interim, we have kind of put together a Survey Monkey doodle poll that we would like you to all fill out after this meeting, and Rachel is going to put it in the chat box, and I will also send it out as a link. And it's just a quick, what data are you collecting? What data do you need? And give us kind of a sense of where your organization is at and what your water quality monitoring needs are. So I don't know if anybody else wants to chime into this discussion real quick before we move on.
Marcy, this is Lane, and I just wanted to mention that we have been discussing for several years now establishing some long-term combined stations that capture, like 5 parameters. It wouldn't be for everything that we want to research, but maybe at critical points along the river, we want to have permanent monitoring stations or semi-permanent, at least for 10 to 15 years, so that we know for sure we're going to get certain kinds of data from it. And so if everybody wants to kind of think about that, send me an email as to whether or not you're interested in forming a network of people who work on this. That's one area that ecology is exploring.
Great, Lane, thank you. And Rachel has posted that Survey Monkey link in there. If you guys just take a few minutes and if you're collecting data and kind of fill out your needs, and we can collect that. Anyone else?
This is Alex, and I'll just note, we saw so much good work today, and we're getting good data on questions we've been asking for a long time, but only really queuing up to answer recently. But I do see a need for figuring out, what's the basic network of long-term data that's going to allow us to look at the integration of all these pieces. You know, we're hitting a point where understanding the relationship between flow, nutrients, temperature, aquatic vegetation dynamics, turbidity, fish survival, they're all interrelated. And the more we learn in each one, the more we learn, oh, nutrient dynamics are totally driven by vegetation. And that's in turn what's driving DO, which in turn is what's maybe one of our limits on fish. So figuring out how we get long-term data to allow that integration, I think, is what will take us to the next step. And so, yeah, Lane, I'm really excited to hear Ecology's interest in investing in long-term sites. Those, even though they're short-term, those 31 PPNL sites, those really excited me. And figuring out how we build these in a network we can maintain over time is going to be really critical. And it's interesting. There's that around 2000 in the early watershed planning days, there was that Stuart McKenzie was hired to do what would a water quality monitoring network for the Yakima Basin look like. And I think 20 years later, we're asking a similar question. Hopefully, yeah, it just, that need for long-term baseline data to allow us to integrate all these questions is just going to grow more critical. That was too much of me.
I agree. And I think, you know, having that discussion separately. So if there are, you know, those of you that within your agency are, you know, intricately connected with the water quality monitoring or those aspects, please shoot me an email. And I think we will set up kind of a side technical work group that can continue these discussions and linking it between, you know, I think it's important that we continue those coordinations between the water quality side of the work that's going on, as well as the habitat side, and look at our river holistically as we continue to move forward into the future with projects. But any other thoughts on that before we?
Marcy, this is Jeff Taylor.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, I just would mention that we are, you know, the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan is investing well over $100 million in restoring sockeye to the Yakima with Cle Elum fish passage and plans for fishways, fish passage at all the reservoirs in the basin. So you're probably looking at $500 million in investment in fisheries restoration that depends on us solving this temperature problem in the lower Yakima, which is a barrier in many years to sockeye migration. So it seems to me we have to figure out management actions that can help solve that. But one of the elements of that is being able to measure whether we had an effect or not, and how much improvement is required to get those sockeye up the river. And so, you know, maybe there's a focus point there that, well, to me, it's necessary. You know, we have to have it. Because we're just spending too much money here to restore sockeye to not have that information.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Jeff, this is Lane. Of course, we're working toward a temperature TMDL at some point. May not be a TMDL, might be a TMDL alternative, but we do need to start doing that research. One of the things I wonder about, though, is the sockeye at the time that they run appear to be of the highest risk because they enter right during the height of the temperature season. What would be your highest priorities for studying how we tease apart what that risk is and how we would avoid that risk?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to that. I do know, though, that Reclamation is launching a science piece of modeling science that is going to try to analyze the vector between sockeye migration, air temperature, weather, and water temperature. And so it seems to me that, you know, we really need the big organizations that are doing monitoring the lower river, the Bureau, Ecology, and Yakima Nation to sort of circle the wagons with the other key folks that are involved in this around an approach so that we're not going in different directions. And I think there's a lot there. We learned a lot this year, and I think Toby talked about some of that today. And Richard, if Richard were on the call, he could talk about what we learned about Sockeye today. But there's a lot we don't know about getting to success. And we did get a lot of Sockeye up the river this year, and we got them up in 2 different primary time frames. And if Michael Porter's still on here, he knows 10 times more about this than me. But I think we got some up in the middle of the summer, July, when they would normally migrate, and another big bunch up in September. But I guess my point is we have to learn enough to make the management actions that are required in order to get those fish to the back up to their point of origin at Lake Cle Elum and the other reservoirs in the basin.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I agree with that. And toward that, having a coordinated group that is multidisciplinary, all of us bring our interests, our skills, and our funding levels together would be an important thing. Maybe we can mobilize that this fall.
Lane, I think you were kind of inviting that conversation a few minutes ago, and I was really happy to hear that. And I think the Bureau is trying to get mobilized too with their hydromet measuring stations. And first of all, I've talked to a number of you about do we need a short-term strategy, because the USGS sites are going out of operation, or they are out of operation right now. But maybe as important or more important would be to have a long-term strategy that really provides synergy between the efforts of ecology, the Bureau, and Yakima Nation.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for that. This is Michael. And I would like to, again, stress that it is very important that we do have this monitoring in place, in particularly for the Sockeye. I do think we have a really unique basin here. We have some management mechanisms that we can use, but we need the data, we need the real-time data to be able to use those mechanisms in the future.
Thanks, guys. I'm taking notes.
Very good. Well, Lane, I think it's worthwhile, then we can have some follow-up discussions and kind of figure out some next steps with some of the other key players. If that sounds good, and we'll continue these discussions moving forward. And I think with that, we are pretty much mostly out of time. I just want to let you know of 2 things that are upcoming. One related to water stargrass. We do have a contract that is currently in place right now. It's on its way, hopefully, to be signed within the next few weeks, where we are going to be doing some pilot studies of large-scale harvesting of water stargrass in the lower Yakima River at 4 locations, and doing just some pilot studies on looking at what happens when we remove water stargrass in terms of fish usage, flow, dissolved oxygen, temperature, and see if it makes a difference if we remove large swaths of it. So that's going to be coming up. We've got multiple partners on that: Columbia Irrigation District, WSU Tri-Cities, Yakima Nation. So it's going to be some exciting research that we're going to get going. And then we are also, BCD has a groundwater grant that is currently going on in Badger Coulee area. And as part of that, looking at the nitrate cycling, the inputs, outputs, we are collecting nitrate analysis from different portions of the Eamon Creek Wasteway, all the way from the headwaters down to the mouth. And that's just to kind of look at what are the contributing factors from the Badger Coulee side into Eamon Creek Wasteway. So just to let you kind of know that that's some other monitoring data that is currently just kicking off and getting done this fall and next year. And with that, I am going to keep us, we're almost at 1, so we're about 10 minutes over right now, and I want to keep us going, but hopefully the next time we all get together, it will be in person. It's a little weird talking to screens, but I appreciate all of you sticking with us. And you know, for a virtual meeting, I'd say it went pretty well with technology. Are there any other comments before we wrap up and adjourn?
Yeah, this is Sean Gross. I just want to say thank you to Marcy and whoever else is helping you behind the scenes. This has been a really good use of time this morning. I've learned a lot, and it's just great to see the quality work going on out there. So thanks to everybody that was part of it.
Yeah, I would echo that, Marcy, and also Mid-Columbia. You guys have been nimble and ahead of the game with the Delta project and the lower river water quality, and we're doing our best to catch up with you. So thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you for the feedback. You're looking at a whole bunch of dots with muted microphones. It's hard to tell. Appreciate you all being part of it today. And with that, I think we will wrap up and say adieu. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday and our upcoming weekend. And don't forget to fill out the survey monkey. Hey, Danielle. Glad you could jump in and join us. And I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody has anything else. So. And Alex, thanks for your work too on helping pull things together. And Mark, thank you for diligently working behind the scenes. I appreciate it. Alex, you're on mute, but I'm sure it's a great conversation.
Oh, nobody wants to hear my inner dialogues. I'll give you a call later, actually. That's probably better. I'm going to go get some lunch.
That sounds good. Follow up on musings later. Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Alex. And Aaron, I wanted to check in with you. Are you there, Aaron Pelly?
Yeah, I am.
I'm glad you were able to make it. I think I was sending it to your WSU address. So hopefully that was some good follow-up where we can continue discussions about potential water stargrass work this upcoming summer. So
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and my WSU address is fine. I've actually asked IT, and so a few months ago, and as long as I keep logging into my email at least every couple months, it'll stay indefinitely.
okay, great. So we'll have some follow-up questions. Mark, we've had some conversations with Aaron, so you and I will have to touch base here about potential with that water stargrass pilot work coming up. So. All right, Jason?
Okay, sorry, Marcy, I had to jump off for 30 seconds, so.
Okay. I was just connecting you, and we've had some conversations with Aaron about the upcoming water stargrass research, so we'll want to have some internal discussions. He's considering moving and possibly getting his PhD, which would make him available to do the pilot research work this summer.
Okay.
Oh.
Are we ready to shut down, or do you want to shut this down?
Nope, I think we are done. So I was just making sure Jason didn't have anything to say. He was just, there, but he said he doesn't have a mic and he's signing off.
All right, then I'm stuck.